Mujin is the divine demon reborn into a weak young body, and this opening fight shows exactly how ugly his old life still is. A wounded man lies under a dark silhouette while the next strike is already being drawn. The swordsman pours more force into his weapon, and the attack swells fast enough to make the whole exchange feel personal. Then the face comes into view, and the man behind the power does not look like he plans to lose quietly. He snaps out, "Only you remain," which tells you this duel has been stripped down to the last survivor. Then the blast lands, and pain hits hard enough to break the smug timing of the fight. Mujin answers by gathering red power in his hands, meeting the pressure instead of backing off. That matters, because once both sides start charging like this, the fight stops being a spar and turns into a wrecking ball contest. An old monk steps in, calls him the accursed divine demon, and hammers down with heavenly Buddha palm strike. Mujin braces with his staff, but the green blast keeps chewing through his defense like it has a grudge. He still gets slammed to the ground, and the attack keeps pressing even after the impact. That is the scale here. One clean hit is not enough, so whoever wins this has to overwhelm the other completely. Mujin claws back by flaring red power again, and swearing he will kill his opponent first. The old master only answers with more force, which is about as subtle as a brick to the face. Mujin meets the pressure with his own staff and keeps the clash alive instead of folding. Blue and red energy slam together, then keep grinding until the whole exchange starts tearing itself apart. Both fighters throw out their signature moves at once. Plum Blossom Flash Strike against Thunder Rolling Strike. The old master spits die, and the collision turns vicious enough that this duel is no longer about skill, just survival. Mujin takes a direct hit, but he is still channeling counter energy through the pain, which is exactly the sort of thing that keeps a monster alive. The power keeps wreathing both of them, and the fight is nowhere near done. Then Mujin finally commits to the finish, driving out a last green strike with everything he has left. He sends the opponent off with a cold "May you be reborn in paradise," which is a polite sentence for a very rude ending. The clash closes in with faces and weapons colliding at point-blank range, and now the old identity is impossible to miss. The divine demon is back in the middle of another blood-soaked exchange, and nobody in reach gets to call it a normal day. Steel keeps screaming as the duel drags on, then Mujin says next, like he is already bored of this one opponent. Our boy answers with blue power overhead, and Mujin answers with overwhelming red force, which is usually a bad sign for everyone else in the room. Years before all this, the divine demon stands at the center of a massacre, and someone finally names him out loud, Yong-chun. The old legend is no rumor anymore, and the people rushing him know they are fighting the man who drenched the Central Plains in blood. A whole group of warriors piles in on him at once, trying to win by numbers, since nobody wants to be the one who volunteers for a one-on-one with this guy. Jung-chun still meets their blades head-on, and the pressure of his strength makes the clash feel less like a duel and more like a bad decision spreading. The fight keeps escalating as an older master unleashes Plum Blossom Rain and tries to drown the battlefield in slashing force. He even pulls the technique short for a beat, which is a bold move when everyone around him is already busy regretting their life choices. Jung-chun answers with the demonic spirit sword art, 5th form, and the whole exchange tilts into raw killing power. Black Dragon Execution crashes in after that, sending one young fighter flying back while the ring artifact catches the chaos like a bystander that made a terrible career choice. He does not stay pinned for long though, because blue power rises to meet the pink-white assault and starts winning the exchange. The Namgoon clan fighter gets carved up by those slashes, and the pain on his face says the plan has stopped being cute. Another swordsman gets hammered back, then Jung-chun brings the blade down with the sort of force that ends arguments permanently. His opponent is driven into the ground, and the Namgoon clan's pride is taking heavier damage than its ribs. Even after that, the enemy spits out one last insult and calls Jung-chun a filthy demon while throwing a glowing blue attack to finish him. Jung-chun weaves through the storm, collides at point-blank range, and answers with a final red surge that turns the whole exchange into one brutal closing strike. Then the opponent flat out says the stubborn life ends here, and Jung-chun is left staring through red light in memory. Lanterns and loved ones flicker through his thoughts, the truth settles in, and he accepts it with a quiet yes as the scene reaches Jung-chun's death and the end of this life. Years before all this, Mujin is already remembering the first losses that hollowed him out, the kind that leave a kid clutching 2 children and trying not to break. The pain hangs over him like a debt he never got to pay off. From that grief, the memory plunges downward, and the whole world feels like it is falling with him. That drop matters because it sets up why he keeps reaching for strength even when everything around him is already gone. Mujin kneels over a dead body with a weapon in hand, and the words hit like a confession. He wanted to live with them all. He does not get that life, so the only thing left is the grudge. So he raises the sword again, this time for vengeance, and the fighting comes back with enough force to split the darkness open. It is not heroic in a clean way, just a man refusing to stay buried by loss. Somewhere in that wreckage, a woman sees the truth written all over his face, and the memory shifts from rage to revelation. The past is not just pain anymore, it is the moment he starts understanding what he has become. Above the landscape, a white light says the answer was there all along, and Mujin finally lets the sword drop. That matters because regret is starting to replace blind fury, and he is admitting he cannot keep living only for revenge. Then the scene snaps to a clan dispute, where an elder flat out rejects a shameless offer to buy the clan's martial arts for a few coins. The Flamehwa clan is already burdened by debt, so this kind of insult lands exactly where it hurts most. Mujin bows before the standing clan members, and that posture says enough on its own. He is still weak, still trying to fit into a world that has already chewed him up. This is the kind of humiliation that keeps a man hungry. Back in the present, Mujin stands in the wreckage with the old title still burning behind his eyes, and he finally speaks it aloud. He is Jungchun, the divine demon the world once feared. That name changes the whole temperature of the room, because now everyone has to deal with what he really is. He answers the challenge by shaping burning blades of energy and calling the other side mad for pushing this far. The duel stops being a negotiation and turns into a warning shot with teeth. The terms are then locked in, with the fight set for Bayang Pavilion on the 5th day of the 2nd month, because martial artists love making things official right before they start wrecking property. One reminder lands with the force of a hammer. This is not just a brawl, it is a promise between fighters. After that, the conversation turns uglier, with one side mocking him for never even learning proper sword work and another asking where he vanished to. That beat matters because it shows the gap between how weak he looks and how dangerous he still is. The criticism keeps coming, and Mujin is judged as too frail to hold a sword at all. Then his brother rushes in, begging him to come to his senses while standing beside 2 children, which only makes the whole family scene sting harder. Mujin stands before the clan monument and finally says the ugly part out loud. Namgun clan patriarch is dead, and the wound in his chest still feels fresh enough to make him wince. That is the first crack in the mystery, because this body remembers pain even when his mind is still catching up. Then his attention snaps to the children, and he asks who they are, because they look far too familiar to be strangers. The answer does not come cleanly, and the whole moment lands like a family wound. Nobody bothered to bandage. Masok, a vassal of the Flamehwa clan, is the one pressing the issue, and the next question makes the real problem obvious. If this body once had talent, why is its energy core in such a wreck? The answer comes the hard way, with force meeting force and Mujin getting shoved back for daring to stand there weak. But he does not fold. The clash keeps grinding forward, and even when the opponent tries to finish it, Mujin hangs in the fight long enough to force a read on the whole exchange. That struggle drags him into the clan's worst memories. The debt pile grows, the father is crushed by it, and the whole house looks like it has been paying for one disaster after another. By the time the children and their elders gather at Bamboo Forest Temple, it is clear the Flamehwa clan is barely holding together. Then the younger siblings step forward, and the scene turns brutal in the most ordinary way possible. Hua Mujin and Hua Soyan are named as the clan's children. Then they blame Mujin for their parents' death straight to his face. That is the sort of family reunion nobody puts on a banner. Mujin looks at their misery and realizes why it hits so hard, because their situation mirrors the 2 children he has already been thinking about. In the middle of all that grief, he also understands the body he owns was crippled and left the clan in ruins. The next piece finally gives him direction. There is a deadline set for the 5th day of the month after the next, so this is not just mourning, it is a race against time. And as he stares inward, he realizes the body still has absurd martial aptitude buried under all that damage, which means recovery might actually be possible. That discovery changes everything, because Mujin decides he can fight even with his eyes closed. Then a servant rushes up, calling for young Master Hua in a panic, and the interruption confirms the situation is already drawing attention. Somewhere else in the chaos, Mujin is already smiling under the mask, because the enemy is finally dead. For him, that is not the ending of the mess, but it is one less problem breathing. An elder gathers his power and calls for preparation, which means Mujin's return is already forcing other masters to move instead of waiting politely. Then Mizumaru steps forward under a heavy purple aura, and the mood turns from warning to open mobilization. Nobody glows like that for a friendly errand. 2 fighters square up in a lightning choke standoff, and the pressure around Mujin's world starts spreading beyond one clan dispute. The Sosal sect, another faction watching for weakness, may make its move now, so the danger is no longer coming from one direction. Mujin's recovery is becoming a signal fire for every opportunist nearby. At a temple entrance, armed men hold their ground, while a hatted messenger type barks orders to carry his words back to their leader. The message is rude, direct, and wearing a hat with confidence it did not personally earn. When someone asks what the problem is, the answer is already clear. Everyone is testing the borders of Mujin's comeback before he fully regains his strength. That pressure turns into violence, and Mujin starts climbing through it one clash at a time. His enemy takes a brutal hit first, the kind that snaps pride backward before the body follows. The warrior on the other side snarls at the surrounding enemies and demands they submit, then gathers energy between his hands. The fight stops being a scuffle and becomes a decision point. Either they break Mujin's momentum here, or he keeps rising. He releases the attack to finish the job, and the blast tears into its target with enough force to scatter the formation. Someone definitely filed that technique under excessive. The combo keeps going until a groan slips out, but then the fighter notices something wrong. The exchange is not ending where he expects, which matters because control of the fight is starting to slip. A fresh strike comes from an unexpected angle, forcing him to brace too late. He drops through the air with weapons trailing after him, which is a very dramatic way to lose track of the floor. Red slashes drive the fall even harder, and Mujin crashes down while his opponent descends above him. him. For a heartbeat, it looks like the enemy has pushed him under. Then Mujin launches back upward and turns the fall around, sending the opponent down instead. That reversal is the whole point. He is not just surviving these fights, he is learning how to retake command mid-impact. Mujin moves away and snaps that he is fine, making the panic around him look slightly embarrassing. The kid is battered, but his mouth is still fully operational. Power surges again as the next exchange ignites, and both fighters commit to another collision. Mujin rises into it while the opponent comes down, each trying to crush the other's timing. Their energies clash in a violent burst, then build toward a final impact. This is no longer about one clean hit, it is about whose martial force can dominate. When both sides stop holding back, Mujin's hand tightens around white power, and the two combatants stare each other down across the divide. The fight pauses just long enough for everyone to understand that the next move decides status, not just survival. Mujin answers by declaring his challenge in the enemy's face, and the opponent's rage only proves the message landed. He is not asking to be recognized anymore, he is forcing the issue. Elsewhere, the money pressure surfaces again when someone demands a loan, dragging the Flamehua clan's debt problem back into the fight around Mujin. A sword can win a duel, but apparently the bill collector still wants his turn. A spirit-like figure addresses subordinates and invites their questions, turning the conflict toward hidden knowledge and larger plans. The outside pressure is not only armed men now, it is information, debt, and faction orders converging at once. Power erupts in a burst, and Mujin makes the threat personal. His enemy will not be able to speak even if he wants to. That is not a warning for later, it is a promise arriving early. Mujin then reveals the place burns down tonight, and the destruction is tied directly to outside orders. The Changhua Merchant Group, a top 10 merchant power in the Central Plain, has told men to strip the Flamehua clan for as much money as possible, so Mujin is staring at the business end of a planned takeover. Mujin walks into the debt hall surrounded by the merchantmen's glow, and the first thing they do is demand one more bite of the clan, the land itself. That is the real game here, not repayment, and he makes that plain by treating their threat like a problem already half solved. The room snaps into chaos as someone lunges back at him, and Mujin answers with the kind of counter that turns a bad meeting into a warning. The message is simple: if the Changhua side wants to squeeze the Flamehua clan, they pick the wrong body to poke. While that pressure builds inside, another group moves through the rain toward a lit building, and their speaker calmly tells the subordinates to write the loan into the books. He even has to remind his own people not to get too greedy with peasants, which is a funny thing to hear right before a debt shakedown. Then the mood turns ugly, because now it is a contest to see who gets beaten first. Tall warriors clash in the corridor, somebody spots the young master, and the whole place realizes this is no longer a routine collection run. Mujin pushes the fight into open space and shows a martial technique that leaves people staring at the blood instead of the breathing room around it. The danger is obvious now. This is not a clan inspection, this is a takeover that can end in bodies. With the dust still hanging around him, Mujin explains where the money problem really started. The Bangho sect, the usury outfit that lent the clan the cash in the first place. Then someone points at a chest and accuses him of stealing from a place that would never lend them more, which is exactly the sort of accounting logic that gets people punched. A tall figure heads out with a breezy good luck send-off, but the corridor does not forget what just happened. The survivors are left standing there with judgment closing in, and the whole mess is now tied to debt, theft, and whichever side blinks first. The scene shifts because Mujin stops playing defense and goes into his own preparation, floating in meditation inside an ornate temple while candles burn around him. He is rebuilding from the inside out, and that matters because brute force alone is not enough for what is coming next. A black-robed figure arrives at the temple entrance asking if this is the place, and the answer comes with a set of absurdly heavy labels measuring the goods inside. Whatever is being sized up here, it is valuable enough to check like cargo and dangerous enough to need a plan. The tension breaks when the dark figure and the leader square off over a large object, and the collision hits hard enough to make the exchange feel less like negotiation and more like impact testing. The dark figure comes out on top with the crate still in hand, which tells you everything about who controls the room now. After that, he casually orders meat-heavy meals and gives himself 2 weeks like he is scheduling a headache on purpose. Then he spells out the problem with his own body. His heavenly martial body clashes with the demonic arts his master taught him, so he has to find a path through the contradiction or stay stuck forever. That answer comes as a blast of energy and a hard declaration that this is his only way out. Mujin is no longer just surviving the clan mess, he is forcing a new road to power with his own hands. When the next challenger taunts him to reveal his hidden side, Mujin drops his stance and lets the dark power surge loose. The demonic form fully blooms, and then the divine beast presence answers back, which is exactly the kind of contradiction that makes everyone else in the room regret speaking. Now fully awakened, Mujin drives forward with a technique that pours blue and red power through his limbs and then comes down from above like a verdict. He lands the strike and sends his opponent flying back, proving the return to strength is no longer theory but a problem the enemy has to absorb right now. Mujin has awakened the power he needed, and now the next phase is simple: prove it works against enemies who can actually punish him. He shoots upward wrapped in blue force, then steadies himself with those bandaged eyes locked in like pain is merely a scheduling issue. The fight has not started clean from nowhere either. Mujin confirms that Masok, a vassal of the Flamehua clan, has prepared the materials he requested, so this power test is already part of a larger plan. Mujin cuts loose first, sending white-blue force force from his weapon, but the wrapped opponent answers with his own heavy blue energy. That counter hits hard enough to drag Mugen off balance, so he spins into a vortex strike and forces his way back through the pressure. Their power collides in a red-white blast, and the exchange turns into a straight contest of output. Mugen is no longer testing a trick here. He is measuring whether his rebuilt strength can hold against a serious wall. Even with red force bursting near his face, Mugen stays focused and calls the strike that tries to split the whole exchange open. Thunder the heavens. The answer comes immediately. Mugen takes a brutal hit, bleeds from the impact, and kicks himself away while gritting through pain in his back. Then the battlefield turns nastier as red blasts rain down from above, forcing Mugen to survive the room itself while the enemy keeps pressing. Mugen raises his blue sword inside the wreckage, counts the moment, and releases a green-yellow wave to punch back through the collapse. A red claw-like strike tears out of the dark, and the ceiling starts coming down with it. Mugen meets the falling pillars with his sword, which is a bold choice when the building has clearly resigned. Pinned inside the destruction, Mugen gathers power through the blade and turns defense into one decisive downward slash. When the debris settles, Mugen is still standing with the sword glowing blue. That matters more than the damage around him. Stronger opponents are hitting him, but they are not stopping him. He follows by unleashing 8-form Heaven's Destruction, wrapping the technique in massive blue lightning as its name burns into the moment. Mugen crosses the golden-lit swords in his stance, and the technique finally stops being borrowed theory. He says he has cut through himself and his own sword, which means his control has caught up to his memory. Then his hand crushes the ornate golden sword handle, making the lesson painfully literal. Expensive handle, short career. The pace shifts after that breakthrough, moving from raw exchanges into reflection and training focus. Someone remembers a swordsman who is the only one able to match that sword, setting the bar Mugen now has to reach again. Soyeon, a member of the training group, answers the next plan with the very practical promise to eat meat 3 times a day until the fight with Chundobo. Mugen then tries to explain the truth indoors, saying he is not the person everyone thinks and claiming his former identity. The problem is that it sounds so absurd the listener brushes it off as fantasy. At night, Soyeon warns him from a distance that if he keeps acting differently, he may lose his memories again. That threat shifts the problem from winning fights to surviving his own unstable rebirth. Mugen looks up in distress and asks whether he will leave the Flamehua clan, the debt-burdened martial clan he is trying to drag back from collapse. Then a new demand lands. The greatest martial clan in Sichuan should satisfy their terms. Mugen's personal recovery is now feeding directly into clan politics, and the next wave of pressure is already moving in. The duel gets put on a clock, and now everyone knows the Hua clan heir has 10 days to get ready or get buried by it. That kind of deadline stops being a rumor the second somebody says it out loud. While the rain keeps hammering down, Mugen powers through the kind of training that leaves a man hanging onto his weapon like it's the last thing keeping him upright. He's already gotten far enough to one-hand a 70-kilogram sword, which is less a milestone and more a polite warning to everybody else. With 1 week left, Mugen keeps standing in the rain with that oversized sword. And the next part is obvious. This duel is no longer about pride, it's about whether he can survive long enough to matter. Then the pressure turns ugly when younger clan members come at him and blame him for their parents dying. So the training shifts from raw strength to control, and an instructor drills the breathing pattern into him while he practices below. The point is simple: if Mugen can't sync his breath with a swing, his sword growth falls apart. By night, Mugen is no longer stumbling through this power. He stands masked and steady with energy built up under the surface, which means the recovery is finally turning into real martial force. That power starts spilling outward in the rain, and once it does, the whole exchange turns dangerous fast. A crackling burst tears through the dark, and somebody spots the target just in time to shout it out. Then the story stops being about brute strength and gets into the actual method behind it. Movement arts need stable breathing, not just meditation, and the body has to move with the sword instead of fighting it. That's why Mugen can suddenly force red energy into claw-like shapes and drive it through the blade without falling apart. Once the technique clicks, the sword work starts landing with real force, and Clan Head Hua shows what a finished strike looks like when the clan's own martial art finally bites back. He drives one technique after another through the opening, and by the end he stands in the wreckage with the energy still rising around him. Mugen answers that same rising pressure with a wild laugh and a plunge into chaotic energy, like he's decided subtlety can sit this one out. He drops through the vortex, swinging a huge blade, which is exactly the sort of entrance that makes enemies reconsider their life choices. Elsewhere, the standoff tightens as 2 men hold their ground with a third figure lurking behind them, and then the arena chaos keeps widening. Mugen stands above armed guards, cracks a joke about needing space, and makes it clear he is no longer the kid people expected to corner. The last beat turns into a full collapse of control. A massive shadow looms over a smaller man, and the men around him start begging their leader to run because soldiers have already boxed them in. At this point, Mugen isn't just surviving the fight, he's forcing everyone else to react to him. Mugen grabs the next challenger by the face and tells him to bring the complaints straight to him, because he is done listening to brave mouths from across the room. The 5 swordsmen answer by squaring up like this is a group project they all failed together. Mugen does not bluff back. He steps in with his aura flaring and cuts loose, turning the standoff into a fight the instant instant he says they can have it. He drives upward with a kick that turns into a sword strike, then keeps the blade high and makes his choice plain. No second guessing, no hesitation, no retreat. The kid is already fighting like regret is somebody else's problem. The masked fighter keeps talking through the clash, admitting he does not live by regrets, and Mujin carries that same cold focus into the next exchange. Then he launches again, and the gap closes in a burst of red and blue force before the blades crash and the whole thing turns savage. Clan head Hwa screams as the pressure spikes, and his opponent taunts him for suddenly wanting to learn martial arts now. Hwa answers by moving like a man who has decided to survive on principle alone. His hand snaps out with enough force to blow the fight wide open, and the other side snaps right back, ordering him to know his place. Hwa refuses to fold, keeps moving, and the whole battlefield starts looking way too small for the energy he is throwing around. Then Hwa unleashes a technique so huge it hangs over the city like a warning sign, and both sides get swallowed in the collision. Someone watching finally says what everyone can see. The man's eyes have changed, and now he looks like a real martial artist. Hwa follows through with one last red strike, but the exchange drags him down with it. When the dust settles, young Master Hwa is left staring at the result in shock, while a wounded fighter lies bleeding on the ground nearby. That win flips the mood fast, and the armed men start charging for the gate before the advantage can slip away. At the entrance, the tension sharpens into a fresh standoff, with one man asking if this is really happening, and the other basically daring him to keep talking. From there, the scene widens again as someone watches with glowing eyes and decides Mujin is not like the others. At the circular gate, the sight of mountains outside only makes the next arrival feel worse, because the power showing up now is not random trouble, it is deliberate trouble. The newcomer rejects the current plan and points straight at the bloodline problem instead. The real issue is not just winning the day, it is getting the target's body stable enough to survive what comes next. That finally names the threat for what it is. A martial master from the Kongdong sect, brought in by the Changhua merchant group, so the fights are no longer just personal anymore. They are part of a bigger power move closing in on Mujin and the Flamehua clan. The clan side of this mess finally turns violent, and the building goes up in flames as the pressure around Mujin's camp starts to spill into open destruction. Whoever is moving now is not waiting for the dust to settle, because this fight has already become a statement. One figure orders the others to wait and takes point alone, which tells everyone else exactly where the authority sits. Then the power answer comes fast as a gateway opens and a beam tears into the sky like the whole place is trying to announce a departure. While the movement around the duel keeps building, Mujin settles himself and reads the situation instead of panicking. Someone nearby starts talking betting logic, basically suggesting that if you know martial arts, backing a martial clan is the only wager that doesn't make you look foolish. Then the real contest snaps on. Mujin launches a blistering sword assault, keeps the pressure on, and cuts straight through the obstruction in front of him, leaving the surrounding structure collapsing around the opening he just made. That's when the wider scandal lands. The Flamehua side asked for the duel first, even though people think they are not built for this kind of fight. Nobody watching can quite make sense of the situation anymore, which is usually a bad sign when a young master is involved. Now the duel gets formal, and Han Yigong of the Kongdong sect steps in as the witness for today's match. That matters because once the witness is named, this stops being rumor and becomes a public trial of skill. With the rules set, both sides explode into motion at once. One fighter drives upward with a bright blue surge while the crowd realizes, a little too late, that the Flamehua clan is bringing out swordsmanship instead of the half-broken image people expected. The combatants square off in front of the ornate pavilion, swords drawn and neither one backing away. When the official calls out for readiness, the whole duel turns from tension into impact in the next breath. Mujin cracks the exchange open with a calm smile, then keeps pressing through openings with the kind of control that makes the opposition look late to their own fight. He tilts back through the clash, answers with a massive red burst, and slams into his opponent hard enough to turn the center of the duel into a light-filled mess. He follows that with a blue technique that puts his power on display for everyone still pretending this is a normal duel. By this point, the point is obvious. Mujin is not here to scrape by. He is here to announce that the Flamehua side still has teeth. The soldiers watching start questioning what young Master Hwa really is, because the old story about him being broken no longer fits what they're seeing. That confusion matters, because once the crowd doubts the label, they have to start respecting the fighter. Clan head Hwa then takes the fight airborne and answers with a savage downward strike, forcing the opponent to eat the full weight of his blade. He keeps chaining attacks into a spinning sequence, and the exchange turns into a raw test of who can survive the other man's tempo. The duel reaches the critical lock when both blades meet and hang there for a heartbeat, all while the fighters are dragged through the sky by their own momentum. That standoff ends the only way this kind of clash usually does, with a central blast of force that throws them apart and leaves nobody in doubt about the scale of Mujin's mastery. The clash finally snaps open, and the force of it sends both fighters reeling through the air instead of letting either man claim the moment cleanly. Mujin keeps pressure on his opponent because a duel like this only ends when somebody's footing, pride, or ribs give out first. One clean hit lands across Mujin's chest and face, and the impact tells the whole story. This opponent is still dangerous, even after all that trading in midair. Mujin does not panic though, and that is the difference between a fighter and a casualty. His thoughts flash back to every stronger enemy he ever faced, and the memory lands on one brutal truth: he always finished them in the end. So he doubles down on that same resolve here and keeps coming. The duel splits into a hard-edged contrast of cold and heat, with Mujin pushing through fire as his power keeps climbing. He comes out of it looking less like a man surviving a fight, and more like a problem nobody in the room can ignore. That kind of display changes the mood fast, so the next exchange turns from pure test of skill into a question of who is still willing to back him. One man asks if the hooded figure is truly refusing to come along, then another swears he will personally see the young Master Hua's final journey through to the end. The fighting resumes immediately, and Mujin answers with a magenta slash that forces his opponent to meet steel with energy. The two of them collide hard enough to shake the whole rhythm of the battle. Neither side gives ground, so the clash just keeps grinding forward until the next impact lands straight through the opponent's guard. He cries out, and Mujin drives the opening deeper instead of easing off like a polite idiot. Mujin braces against the return strike with a golden aura, and the fact that he can stop it at all rattles the other fighter. That shock matters, because once an enemy realizes he is no longer controlling the pace, the whole fight starts slipping away from him. Mujin cashes in that opening with an explosive counterattack that blasts his opponent straight upward and leaves him twisted in the air. From there, the exchange turns vertical and ugly, with both sides trading blue strikes until neither can pretend this is still under control. Then Mujin reveals the next layer of his technique, invoking the Peerless Nine Swords second form, before slamming out the weapon destruction attack. His opponent eats the full force of it, and the gap in their power stops being debatable. Even after that, Mujin keeps the pressure on with another blue slash, forcing the enemy to panic and wonder how he is still standing in front of him. The answer comes in the form of a final collision, and when red and black energy crash together, the whole exchange blows apart in a white-hot burst. Mujin gets hurled back by a blast of red force, then catches the next beam head-on and eats another crushing hit. The fight is no longer a clean contest. It has turned into whoever can stay upright longest. Even after taking that punishment, Mujin forces himself back up and gathers a fresh burst of power from the ground. He answers with blue and white energy that punches straight through the exchange and throws his opponent off balance. The hit lands hard enough that the other fighter is crying out in pain and triumph at the same time. That's the danger now. Mujin is not just surviving, he is cracking people open in return. Word spreads fast that someone's energy core is shattered too, and the pressure shifts again. One warrior drops hard while another braces for the impact, because this mess is getting close to fatal. Mujin answers by pulling red energy through his body and then driving blue force straight back down at the enemy. He keeps the assault rolling, turning the clash into a one-sided shove. He lands on the stairs with his weapon ready, and now the scene widens into a bigger problem. A voice calls out to young Master Hua, while a beast-like shadow lurks nearby, which is never a comforting combo. Mujin lifts a massive sword overhead and faces out like he is daring the whole courtyard to try him. The old man beside him shrugs off the situation with a dry little laugh, then starts talking about what happens if people choose to leave the clan. The pressure keeps stacking as Mujin stands between dangerous forces on both sides, and then a circle of armed men closes in below him. That's the real point here. The conflict is no longer personal, it is turning into clan business. Mujin snaps out a line about a debt party and makes it clear he means the Bangho sect bastards, not some cheerful banquet. Then he draws his weapon with blue aura flaring off it like trouble has officially arrived. Three figures gather in the courtyard, and the tall one clears up the joke by spelling out exactly who the debt party is for. This is Bangho sect territory now, and the mood says nobody is here for friendly bookkeeping. An elder appears in the doorway as the tension hardens into open confrontation. Then a red sword slams into the ground, and that's the sort of entrance that tells everyone the arguing is over. Two warriors square up in fighting stance, and Mujin orders Masak to stay close behind him from now on. He has already taken control of the room, which is bad news for anyone hoping this turns into a simple visit. Inside the Bangho sect's usury hall, one of their members nervously greets the arrival like he already knows this is trouble. He then recalls that Mujin crippled the second son of the Chunghwa merchant group, and Mujin makes the visit plain by saying he came to pay back the debt. Mujin has already turned a routine debt visit into a full-on power struggle, and now the Bangho sect realizes he is not here to negotiate nicely. The room goes tight with that understanding, which is usually the part right before somebody regrets standing up. Then Che Wungel, the Bangho sect leader, steps into the standoff and starts probing Mujin's purpose, while the air around them gets ugly with killing intent. He is testing whether this kid is bluffing, but the answer shows up in the pressure itself, which is not exactly subtle. The bigger problem arrives with the Sosal sect's Death Black Crow, and that changes the argument from business to body count. Once he drops in with that much murderous energy, everybody in the room understands this is no longer a debt collection. It is a turf war with blades. The clash explodes upward in purple and red, with attacks crashing down so hard they shred the ground, and the rhythm of the fight at the same time. Mujin keeps pressing, and the enemy answers by trying to turn the whole exchange into a kill zone. Mujin doesn't back off for a second, and that only makes his threat land harder when he starts talking about air flowing nicely and the families and subordinates tied to his enemies. He throws down the challenge to the Sosal sect outright, then tells the pleading man he is dying here no matter what he says. Now the fight collapses into raw domination, with Mujin standing calm inside that crushing pressure before dragging his victim down and grinding him into defeat. Even when another opponent shows up, Mujin keeps the same cold confidence, because this is the part where he reminds everyone that survival is a privilege he hands out. Mujin stops playing defense and snaps into offense, cutting through the exchange like he's done being polite. Then he decides the man can live, which sounds merciful until he starts reading the actual paperwork and turns the whole thing into a bill. He pushes the pressure even higher and makes it clear the mercy was never the point, because the people around that target are still getting crushed. When someone panics and asks who really backs the Bangho sect, the answer matters less than the fact that Mujin is already winning the room by force. Mujin overwhelms another fighter so completely that the onlookers start rethinking the whole duel situation in real time. That's the danger of underestimating him. One bad read, and suddenly the clan's enemies are watching their own confidence get folded in half. Cut to clan head Hua, who is now making deals like a man ordering weather. He tells his operative to bring back one child alive, kill the rest if needed, and get it done before sunrise, which is a very warm way to describe a murder timetable. Then the scene slams back into battle as Hua calls out Mujin's name and starts loading up a massive flame attack. He doesn't even hide the intent anymore. He wants to tear apart everything Mujin cares about right in front of him. Mujin answers with that same terrifying look, and the story makes the shift official. This is no longer a bullied heir scraping by, but a demonic return in progress, with the fight now carrying the weight of everything he's about to destroy. The recap widens out to remind you what all this actually hangs on. The Flamehua clan once stood high enough that even famous masters didn't want trouble with them. People cheered the clan in Jicheng, then the Flame Emperor died, and the whole house started sliding into ruin. That collapse explains why a departing young Master Hua becomes such a dangerous sight, and why the next blows matter so much. The danger escalates fast enough that an elder has to shout about the young master and young lady being in trouble. Then the fight turns into a scramble for survival. Mujin stops playing defense and turns the whole fight into a pressure test, and the enemy answers with raw force. The elder holds the line in front of the younger ones, then steps in with his fan weapon and tells them to stand back quietly, which is usually the sort of line people say right before things get worse. He meets the massive attack head on, and the clash spits out enough force to shove the enemy back. Mujin rides that opening, rising with his weapon lifted like he already knows how this ends. The next exchange gets uglier fast as Mujin swings in with a white blade and smashes through a red wave of energy. He gets swallowed in the surge, then blasted downward anyway, because the enemy is still throwing around enough power to make the floor regret being there. Mujin refuses to stay down and drives upward through the red aura like he's forcing the fight back onto his terms. Someone spots him and blurts that it's Hua Mujin, which is the moment his return stops being a rumor and starts becoming a problem. He drops back into the battle over the crowd, then hits his opponent mid-air with a glowing fist and follows it by calling up blue lightning. From there, he's no longer just surviving, he's announcing that the old weakling version of him is gone. The enemy still tries to meet him with brute force, but Mujin keeps cutting through the answer and cracking the formation apart. One commander finally panics and orders everyone to attack at once and kill him, which is basically an admission that single combat has already failed. That order just feeds the chaos, because Mujin slips through the incoming attacks and hits back so hard the whole clash explodes outward. He ends up standing through the wreckage while everyone else is busy falling over their own confidence. Then Mujin surges straight out of the power storm with a scream, and that roar bridges the fight into the next phase of his return. From here, the battle stops being one isolated blow-up and becomes the start of the clan pulling itself back together around him. Now the scene shifts to the aftermath of that return, and Mujin is still forcing his presence into every room he enters. He drops in over a child's head in red-lit power, then clashes with another fighter in the forest, because even when he's not on the main field, trouble still finds him first. The last image lands on the part that matters most. Mujin shields the children while a huge dark threat hangs over them. That's the new shape of the story now, with his power no longer just for winning fights, but for keeping the clan and its people from collapsing again. In the bamboo forest, somebody spots Mujin's approach and blurts out the obvious question, because this guy has a habit of turning up right when everyone is already rattled. He walks straight to the children and checks if they are hurt, then immediately starts barking at the one still groaning about a chopped arm, like pain is a luxury he does not have time for. Mujin answers the only way he really knows how, with force, and the children get a front row lesson in why standing in his way is a bad hobby. That clash matters because the clan's weakest people are no longer being left behind. They are being covered while the real enemies keep circling. Then the larger threat comes into focus. Buchun, a master of the Changhua merchant group, starts demanding details about the Flamehua clan massacre and who is next on his list. Mujin is no longer just protecting children in the woods, he is standing in the path of a merchant-backed attack that wants the clan finished. Elsewhere, the atmosphere turns tense and strange around the clan's younger members, and one of them has to be told that this kind of pressure is not normal for children from a martial clan. The answer lands hard enough that even the quiet warnings start sounding like a prelude to a bigger war. That worry gets met with reassurance from a swordmaster, who trusts the young master's skill and names their technique the Bibuz dance. Mujin then steps in and teaches the first principle in plain terms. Face the opponents like you are locking their feet to the ground, which is his way of making a messy fight sound almost civilized. The learners throw themselves into the drill so hard that Mujin actually stops and stares, then admits they are still too young to carry this alone. He cuts the lesson short not because they fail, but because he sees exactly how much more growing the clan needs before it can survive what is coming. That turns into an apology and a vow in the same breath. Mujin blames himself for the clan's broken martial lineage, then promises to restore the Flamehua clan to its former glory. And just as important, he swears he will hunt down the bastard responsible and kill him no matter what, which is the kind of promise that tends to make enemies nervous for a reason. He pushes into training with ferocious intensity, and the sword power answer starts to wake up in him. By the time the transformation finishes, it is clear Mujin is not just getting stronger, he is rebuilding himself from the inside out. Then he returns home and says the only thing that matters, he is back. The gatekeeper tries to brush him off as a beggar, but an older man snaps at him to watch his mouth. And that tiny argument says everything about how quickly Mujin's standing is shifting inside the clan. His power surge peaks into something unmistakable, and the story widens again as talk turns to the Taoist inheritance and the Wudang sect lineage. That matters because Mujin is no longer just fighting local trouble. He is brushing up against the kind of martial heritage that changes how every faction looks at him. Now the White Immortal storms into the conflict with blue energy blazing, and the fight stops being about recovery and starts looking like a direct confrontation. He presses the attack, turns on Mujin with a challenge, then keeps hammering through the Elder with another blast, which is the sort of entrance that ruins everyone's afternoon at once. The White Immortal drops in from above and smashes the old Elder hard enough to blow the disguise right off him. So much for the fake beard plan, which is already having a worse day than anyone involved. The old man spits out that they tried to swindle him and admits he actually bid on it, then immediately escalates to mutilation like that is a normal follow-up. He is furious enough to start naming body parts, which is never a great sign for the room. The White Immortal keeps pressing the attack and lines up one last strike, while the Elder staggers and vows revenge from the carriage. The fight is no longer subtle. Not that it ever really had the manners for that. Elsewhere, a carriage with 4 horses gets ready to roll, and the old trouble just keeps moving instead of dying. He steps out into a forest meeting already thinking about payback, which means the next ambush is basically announcing itself. He spots the new target in the trees and orders his muscle to drag the sleeping Taoist out of the carriage and make an example of him. That is when the supposedly sleeping man wakes up furious because apparently one missed nap is enough to ruin his entire business trip. The Taoist rises with real power behind him and promises the interlopers will pay for the interference. Then he throws himself into the fight at full force, and the blast that follows makes it clear this is no ordinary roadside scuffle. He comes down with a heavy weapon strike, and the clash throws energy everywhere as the other side finally answers in kind. Meanwhile, a dark dragon-shaped entity with glowing eyes appears and turns the whole mess into something far uglier. One figure stands with arms spread as if calling something in, while another watches with arms crossed like he has already seen this disaster play out. Then the one in the middle starts clutching his head, which is usually a bad sign unless your hobby is suffering. A glowing blade comes up through the chaos, and someone shouts for everyone to come out. Right after that, a massive weapon comes into play, and the warning about shortening his own life tells you this fight is about to get stupidly expensive. They crash together in mid-air, and the whole scene finally reveals itself as a gathering of Zhongshan's 4 demons. That is the point where the battlefield stops being a duel and turns into an open invitation for disaster. Mujin stands alone at the gate, facing the gathered enemies, then lunges forward with his blade blazing. He is no longer reacting to the chaos, he is walking straight into it on purpose. The demons strike from different angles, but Mujin keeps driving through them and uses the exchange to launch himself upward. He is forcing the pace now, and that matters, because once he starts dictating the rhythm, everyone else is just trying not to get buried by it. Mujin settles into the finishing position, ready to end it if the opening holds. At this point, the enemies are not testing him anymore. They are trying to survive the version of him that keeps getting sharper by the second. Across the region, a woman squares off with a bearded man as the conflict widens beyond one front. Then she reacts in shock at the claim that he is not 30, because that kind of age trickery is exactly the sort of nonsense martial circles love to hide behind. Another woman stands beside 2 mythical beasts, and the strange lineup makes it clear this conflict is spreading into even stranger territory. Then a man swings a spiked staff into the mix, and the next exchange is already one bad decision away from becoming a massacre. Mujin keeps pressing the same brutal lesson. Demonic arts are not a faction badge, they are a way of life, and anybody standing in his path is about to learn it the hard way. One reckless charge reminds his enemy of someone he once cared about, which is a sentimental thought to have right before a fight goes bad. The pressure spikes when stern figures demand obedience and a huge mechanism kicks into motion, as if the whole setup is finally paying off. Then a servant starts screaming, and the reason becomes obvious fast. Somebody has been living well off stolen money, and the people above him are done pretending not to notice. When a warrior is told to leave and still keeps interfering, the scolding comes out sharp enough to cut through the room. A servant then tries to frame the battlefield for everyone, naming Zhongshan's 4 demons and the Flamehua clan's first young master, and suddenly this is no small local scrap anymore. The warrior shuts the chatter down and orders them aside, but the swordsman answers with pure contempt and draws steel anyway. He makes it plain he is no ordinary swordsman. Then Mujin tightens his grip on the dark staff and starts pulling blue power through it, because the polite part of the conversation is over. Mujin's opponent tries to hold ground while his servant begs for permission, but the young master refuses the help and goes up on his own. He slams down with blue lightning in his palm and drives the weapon with full force, turning the exchange into a direct clash where somebody is about to lose more than pride. The blue strike meets defense head-on, and for a moment the fight locks into raw strength instead of tricks. Then the creature crushes back. Mujin reels, and the ugly truth lands with it. His sword is gone, and the crowd watching from a distance can already see who is getting buried. Now the enemy has the upper hand, descending with red energy already gathered for the finishing blow. The blast comes straight down in a storm of symbols and wild release, and the only thing louder than the attack is how badly this battlefield wants a winner. Something else steps in before the execution lands, intercepting the attack with a staff and asking the kind of grave question that means the situation just got bigger. The reply comes with glowing red eyes and a threat to make the other man hear screams from the grave beside him, which is a very specific kind of bad news. That pressure pulls the scene toward a new player, and the next reveal makes the danger feel personal instead of random. An officer refuses to let someone tied to unorthodox martial heavens die under her roof, so now the problem is not just survival, but who gets to claim the body first. The conflict widens again when an attacker appears above the city with allies gathered below, opening with a sort of calm that usually hides a disaster. Then he turns straight to Mujin and starts pricing 4 men behind him at 500 gold ingots each, which means the next move is now a ransom game. While the bargaining starts, a subordinate hauls a treasure chest of gold into a bag, and that tells you everything about how ugly this deal is getting. Mujin is no longer just fighting enemies on the field. Now he is being measured, purchased, and dragged into faction maneuvering in the same breath. Mujin catches the thief off guard with a single sound, and the man hesitates just long enough to realize this isn't going the way he planned. The glowing patterns flare around the room, so even the thief has to admit Mujin sees through the trick. Then Mujin stops playing nice and blasts the whole group through the floor, turning the raid into a sudden exit strategy. The thief can only toss out a cheerful farewell while they all go down hard, which is a bold choice for a man mid-fall. The victim snaps back that this is not a reunion and not funny because the thief has already robbed him more than enough times. That cleanly ends the scam and kicks the story into a new phase, where the Flamehua clan finally comes into view as the place all this trouble is circling. Inside the Flamehua clan, 3 bearded men stand as the last defenders of a clan buried under debt and pressure. Their posture says the same thing Mujin has been fighting for all along. If nobody holds this line, the whole house collapses. One of them swears they will free the clan from the Chonghua merchant group's grip, and the vow lands with enough force to matter. Mujin stands at the center of that momentum with 2 mythical beasts beside him, and now he looks less like a bullied youngster and more like the person everyone has to answer to. Another man promises to repay everything, which tells you the clan's debts are finally turning into a fight instead of a slow death. At the same time, the Kongdong sect shows up on the other side of the board, because money problems in this world always attract martial problems too. An elder starts thinking the obvious dangerous thought: if they can clear the debt, the merchant group loses its chokehold. And right on cue, Mujin gives off the kind of pressure that makes people realize the sleeping dragon has already opened its eyes. The Chonghua merchant group is still standing off in the distance, but the mood around them has changed. After more than 12 years of backing the wrong side, they are staring at a result that looks a lot like failure with extra paperwork. Mujin then makes his move and announces 3 new warriors for the clan, which immediately rattles everyone around him. When they challenge him, he cuts straight through the concern and says the clan has the money to afford them because he is done asking permission from people who move too slowly. That decision pays off fast, because the new fighters start moving through the city with real force behind them. One of them claims he did not kill anyone. He just took back what was rightfully his. And then the talk turns to one of Zheng Sosal's artifact pieces, number 17, which suddenly makes this feel less like recruitment and more like a very expensive problem. The moment the artifact enters the picture, the whole operation shifts from muscle to loot. A strike slams into the building, purple power surges, and a huge workforce moves in with supplies, while a red force drops from above. So now everybody wants the same prize at once. Mujin decides this is the point to use the artifact, and that is never a sentence that leads to calm discussion. He orders the thing secured and picked up, then mocks the demonic arts crowd for guarding baskets like amateurs, right before one of them tries to absorb the target and make the mess even worse. Mujin cuts straight through the basket-carrying enemies, and the cleanup is so decisive that the rest of the crew finally stops pretending this is a normal job. Then he barks, "Everyone follow me," because if he's leading, the whole mess at least has a direction. He pushes the assault harder, dropping with enough force to make even the beast side of this fight look obedient. Then his aura turns ugly, his eyes flare red, and the man standing between power and panic starts looking less human by the second. Now Mujin is fighting like a master who's already halfway to winning, standing with 2 massive beasts at his side and forcing the blue energy beast to answer him. The important part is simple. The stronger his command gets, the less anyone else in the field can afford to hesitate. That pressure lands hard, and even the fighters bracing under it start buckling instead of advancing. One man chokes out a scream, while another stares down at the sensation like it just crawled into his bones and bought a seat. Mujin's side of the field turns into a full-on conditioning drill, with the group being ordered to tighten up and push through the force instead of breaking under it. It's brutal, but that's the point. If they can't endure this, they're dead weight before the real war even starts. On the other side, a bearded man strains under the rope setup while the suspended bodies stay in place, and one wrong move sends a man tumbling away from the line. He warns Jang Sosol that anyone who unties it will lose his life with it, which is a wild way to make a knot sound legally binding. Jang Sosol is still sitting there eating among the hanging bodies, which is either nerve or a complete misunderstanding of the room. Then the overhead count lands at 42, and suddenly the whole trap feels less like clutter and more like a death toll with rope on it. That kind of pressure explains why the training test turns into a hard choice at the waterfall. Soyeon spots the rushing water, calls it refreshing, and the older men immediately sound like they'd rather be anywhere else. One trainee, Ya Young, goes first and dives into the current, so the rest of the group has to decide whether fear is worth more than survival. Chunmuk hesitates for half a second too long, then the others throw themselves in one after another just to keep up. Moojin cuts off the last bit of hesitation with a simple order: jump or get out of the way. The trainee can't quite bring himself to talk back, which tells you everything you need to know about how the kid's authority is landing now. That command starts to pay off elsewhere, where young Moojin is being praised while still tangled in rope restraints. The praise sounds almost polite, but the setup around him says this is still a restraint test, not a victory lap. Then the rope fight turns nasty and young Moojin gets dragged down hard. An elder watches it happen and calls his opponent a lunatic, and the reaction from the others makes it clear this has crossed from training into something far meaner. Moojin's training ground has turned into a pressure cooker, and anyone who hesitates now gets left behind. The point is simple: if he keeps pushing these kids, some of them will break, and the rest might finally become useful. A braided fighter starts barking orders and trash talk while the pace picks up around him, turning the drill into a real scrap. Soyeon is right in the mess now, so this stops being theory and starts becoming survival. The fighters keep moving through the structure in a brutal endurance test, and the whole thing becomes less about style and more about whether they can keep their legs under them. One of them even complains about the required laps, which is a nice touch when everyone looks one breath away from collapse. The braided man snaps at the others for acting like they chose this suffering for fun, then answers with more violence when nobody backs down. He does not want sympathy, and he definitely does not want a discussion. He makes it plain that the next person in his way is getting killed first, and that kind of declaration changes the room fast. When he ends up downed and tied up instead, the whole lesson lands. Strength here comes with a price, whether anyone likes it or not. A bound young man strains against the ropes and then suddenly explodes with power, forcing everyone nearby to stare. Moojin has clearly crossed into the kind of force that makes the training look like a warm-up, and that's exactly why the room goes quiet for a second. Moojin stands beside a tiger beast companion and a woman in ceremonial robes, while an older man in a bright green coat watches with his arms crossed. That setup tells you this is no longer just private sparring, because bigger eyes are now measuring what Moojin can actually do. The braided fighter finally realizes who he's looking at and blurts out that it's young Master Moojin. That recognition matters, because the person they thought was just another trainee is now the one making the battlefield bend around him. Moojin lashes out with sword energy so fast the opponent can barely keep up, and the attack gets nastier by the second. The opponent is already asking how he can possibly wield swordsmanship like that, which is usually a bad sign for the person asking. A bearded man demands the intruder show himself before he cracks his skull open, and the answer comes back immediately: it's Moojin. So now the fight isn't just about showing off technique, it's about surviving the fact that Moojin has arrived in person. The clash turns into an all-out exchange of opposing techniques, with Moojin hammering through red energy waves and then shrugging off retaliation behind a purple shield. He keeps moving forward anyway, because backing up here would mean giving the bearded man room to breathe. Moojin loads up another devastating strike and keeps the pressure on until the bearded man starts getting shoved back step by step. Then he points out the mistake outright. The older fighter is so busy staring straight ahead that he's missing the real angle of attack. Moojin keeps the pressure on with a red charge strike, but the exchange instantly turns ugly when a blast of blue force throws the other fighter skyward and slams him back down. The older man's face goes blank with shock, because whatever Moojin just hit him with is already outside normal martial duels. Then the scene cuts to the instructors, and the special training finally ends after everyone has been dragged through enough pain to count as progress. They all kneel in formation as the instructor barks the next phase, because now it stops being survival and turns into practical sparring with real consequences. Elsewhere, the bearded man is literally tied down, while an armored figure stands over him, and 4 figures line up like the room itself is ranking their importance. One observer mutters that the young master's madness still flares up sometimes, which is a charming way to describe a problem that can wreck a whole plan. Now the artifact fight gets personal. A blast of blue lightning slams into the device. The young master realizes it is not some ordinary folding screen, and the harder he pours in inner energy, the harder it pushes back. He answers that backlash with even more blue cyan force, and decides to see it through to the end. That matters, because he is no longer testing a strange object, he is forcing it to reveal what kind of power is trapped inside. The device finally breaks the contest open with a massive white-pink eruption, and the poor guy on the receiving end gets blasted so hard he is screaming before he even understands what failed. A bystander then spots something stranger than the pain itself. Two incompatible energies are fighting inside the tool, and that clash is what makes it dangerous. That discovery flips the mood fast. The man studying it decides this is a real find, identifies it as the lost original text of the mind-severing sword art, and even the people behind him react like someone just handed him a live grenade with a manual. With the artifact finally under control, the fight spills back into open combat as two figures crash together in the air, and the blue and red energy starts trading places like neither side wants to blink first. Mujin is now dealing with a power source that does not behave like a normal weapon, so brute force alone stops being enough. Back in the compound, Masok greets the young master, and Mujin immediately asks where everyone went. Masok barely gets the answer out before a sudden impact shakes the place, which tells Mujin the problem has already moved beyond one room and into the whole clan. Mujin snaps at them for hiding a crisis from him, then rushes off through the city on a surge of power. He is done being kept in the dark, and when the next person stops him to mention the Jichang martial tournament, the timing already feels like trouble. Then an elegant woman steps in and names herself Ji Chang, which is the sort of entrance that means the next conversation will not stay polite for long. Mujin has barely landed in the new situation before another faction is already claiming space around him. Zicheng stands right in Mujin's face, and the tension snaps when both of them admit they have been hunting the same object. Mujin does not care who came first, and he tells them to find it themselves and get out of his way. 1281, 1282, 1284. He answers that attitude with force, blasting Zicheng's group backward and clearing the space around him. One onlooker immediately clocks the problem. This guy is rude, wild, and acting like his head took a hard hit somewhere along the road. 1285, 1286. The backlash keeps building until Hua Mujin's power flares so hard that everyone can see it, and somebody finally says his name out loud. That kind of uncontrolled surge is exactly why this person had to come in person instead of sending a polite note like a normal human being. 1287, 1288. Now the room is split cleanly. Mujin is boxed in by an elder and disciples, while Zicheng watches from a safer distance. The problem has gone from a private scuffle to a public test, which means every faction in reach is about to start measuring him. 1289. A man laughs about young Master Mujin recovering from his madness, then reaches toward the thing on his arm while talking up the old red flame art. Mujin, already tired of the circus, steps in masked and asks if the man still has enough pride left to draw his sword. 1292, 1293, 1294, 1295. The challenge turns ugly fast, and a blast of purple-black power erupts between them like nobody bothered to bring manners to the meeting. Both sides push through the aftermath, and the whole exchange shifts from talking to survival in one heartbeat. 1296, 1297, 1298. Before it can spiral further, a long-haired woman cuts it off and asks who Mujin even is and why he is here. He starts to answer, but the moment stalls out as the two women around him force the conversation into a pause. 1299, 1300, 1301. That pause becomes the opening for a bigger reveal. The Flame Emperor Hua Jute is identified, and suddenly the scene stops being about one argument and starts smelling like clan power. Mujin is no longer just dealing with random challengers, because now the heavy names are walking in too. 1335, 1337, 1340. At the table, someone bows to Poison Emperor with all the respect in the world, which is never a casual move when martial politics are involved. A little later, the official voice announces the Little Dragon Ascension Tournament, and everybody present hears the same thing. The arena has opened for business. 1341, 1344. Then the mood turns nasty again, when a dark presence declares Hua will be the first offering. Hua cuts the nonsense off immediately, and the two of them square up in front of the crowd like neither one plans to blink first. 1347, 1348, 1349. Elder Joe finally explains why the clan's enemies are circling so openly, starting with the old balance that held when the Flame Emperor was still alive. Chief Steward Zhang is one of the people leaning harder on the weakened clan now, and the reason is ugly. The feud goes back to a major clash with the previous clan head over different ideas of self-discipline. 1351, 1352, 1353. With the history laid bare, Mujin stops talking and throws out a violent red-tinged attack to answer the pressure head-on. The fight jumps into the air as both sides trade energy, which is what happens when pride, debt, and old grudges all pile into one arena at once. 1354, 1356. Zhang answers with a blue strike that lands cleanly, and Mujin finally gets tagged hard enough to make the exchange matter. Then Zhang follows through with a red and blue counter, and the impact hits so sharply the moment freezes on the question of whether Mujin can hold his ground. 1358, 1360, 1361. Jang's hit sends Mujin skidding back, but he stays on his feet instead of folding. That only makes Jang meaner, because now he's not trying to win clean, he's trying to kill. Red slashes rain down as Mujin slips the pressure and answers in motion, forcing the duel to keep moving. The fight stops being a simple exchange and turns into a chase where one mistake gets punished instantly. Mujin surges back in with a burst of golden force, and the clash snaps hard enough to make the whole exchange feel like a reset. He keeps coming in the air, which is his way of saying he is done being pushed around. The next exchange turns nastier as Mujin starts unloading with heavy orange gold power and keeps the pressure on. For a moment, he looks less like a bullied kid and more like the problem standing in front of Jang. Then Jang forces him back with a brutal staff swing, and Mujin eats the impact instead of pretending it didn't happen. He still gets back up talking trash, which is a bold choice when you're lying under the other guy's boot. Mujin answers with a blue-powered launch, and the strike sends Jang flying hard into the wall. That's the turning point, because the fight is no longer even, and Jang has to survive instead of dominate. The duel keeps spilling outward as red-clad fighters jump in, and the whole crowd starts reacting to the chaos. One of them even gets a hold of Jang's mask, which is the sort of humiliation that makes a bad day feel personal. The scene shifts again into a separate clash, and Seokjeong steps in with his clan name on his lips and blood in his tone. Once the red and white energy starts colliding, this becomes less a match and more a public statement. A martial manual appears next, and the talk turns to the mind-severing sword art. So now the fight has a technique worth killing over. That gives the last outburst real weight, because someone in the crowd is furious enough to challenge the Flame Hua clan right out loud. They decide to swap the bracket, and the whole setup starts smelling like a rigged tournament. One man even names Seokyoso as the replacement, which tells you this fight is already being managed like a dirty ledger instead of a fair match. Mujin runs into an opponent who actually recognizes him, and the conversation wastes no time getting rude. He cuts off the chatter and keeps the pressure on, because this duel is moving straight towards steel, not small talk. The gap in skill shows up fast, and Mujin starts getting pushed around by a faster sword style than the crowd expected. That matters because this is the point where the fight stops being even and starts becoming a public humiliation. The victor stands over him and goes for the finish, but stops when something in Mujin changes. White energy snaps awake in his hand, and the man who was just cornered suddenly comes up wearing a brand new terrifying edge. After the battle, the healer's news lands hard. The bones can be set, but the hands are ruined, so the sword path is blocked. Mujin still stands there wrapped up and glowing, which means he is not backing off just because his body has reasons to quit. He answers that setback with a brutal burst of power, and the result is loud enough to make people start naming legends around him. The rumor takes shape fast in Zicheng, because now there are two crippled brothers being spoken into existence before anyone has even cooled down. Mujin's face hardens into that dark, blood-streaked look right before he unleashes another massive strike. A red-haired man with a demon-like companion steps in, and the scene turns into one more ugly collision of power and bad timing. Mujin finally lands the kind of hit that lets him shout victory, and for a second it looks like the other side is done. Then the bigger thing in the fight answers back, furious that a sword was even raised at its body, so the aftermath turns into a warning instead of a clean ending. The charging enemy comes in hard, promising nobody leaves alive, but Mujin steps up and takes credit for the strike anyway. Then he gives Mujin a quick word of praise before ending the exchange with one clean finishing blow, and the whole point snaps into focus. This is not some grand tournament, it is a real fight with real consequences. He starts to say more, then the moment stretches just long enough for someone to realize who is standing there. The shock lands fast, because the name on everyone's mind is Hong Johang, the hidden dragon of Zicheng, and that means the trouble just got a lot more serious. Hong Johang spells out the turning point, saying the Crimson Sword sect stepping in changes everything. Then he rises above the mess, throws down overwhelming force, and sends people flying like they were never part of the plan to begin with. The men on the receiving end can barely react before the pain hits all at once, and Hong Johang just laughs through the chaos while brushing off the scale of the fight. It is a smug little line, but the damage does the real talking. Back at the gate, Mujin presses the survivors and asks if they even understand what kind of gate this is. He answers their panic with force, keeps them pinned long enough to test his technique, and then checks the result like a man grading homework he already expects to pass. The beaten men get a deadline and a dismissal, which is about as generous as Mujin ever gets when he is done talking. Right after that, the story widens out again. Martial artists keep lining up for the clan's warrior test, because once word gets around that power is in play, the crowd never really stops. Elsewhere, the battlefield keeps swelling with bigger names and uglier tools. A man stands guarded by two massive tigers, another figure works some glowing device, and purple power starts to gather like somebody is preparing to ruin everyone's afternoon. The fighting spreads across a fortified ruin, and then into a wasteland where people are already running for their lives. One man strains under a massive dark beam, another swings a green energy blade, and the whole line of defense starts collapsing under the pressure. That push finally detonates in a green blast that catches all four figures at once. Even so, the clash is not over yet, because a blue parry meets a final counter, and Mujin answers with a peerless Nine Swords third form, the kind of name that usually means somebody is about to have a very bad day. Years before all this, the memory snaps back to a boyhood lesson, where a single word, destruction, turns into a savage burst that tears through the structure in a wash of blue force. The old man's power is the real lesson here. This isn't just violence, it's the kind of technique that explains why everyone remembers his name. The boy then realizes the powder in play never was poison, just a setup to force his hand, and that gets him thinking hard about what he just saw. The old man follows that train of thought with an apology, and tells the girl to sit down, because he needed to see exactly what her swordsmanship can do. From there, the memory widens into a lesson about power and timing, as the elder stands there with that heavy, commanding presence, and a glowing golden weapon in his grip. Then he warns the girl to get behind cover, and the whole thing starts feeling less like a conversation and more like a test nobody asked for. The girl ducks down behind the rocks, both of them hiding while he tells her not to peek, and she finally recognizes him with a shaken grandfather. That matters because the scene shifts from mystery to family memory, and now the emotion hits harder than the battlefield noise ever could. Back in the fight, the elder uses cyan green energy to turn aside the incoming attacks, then drives straight into a clash that erupts in a massive blast. He is not just blocking anymore, he is showing the shape of a peak technique being born in real time. Right as that power peaks, the name drops, Peerless 9 Swords. Then the ultimate answer comes out with one clean word, destruction, and the whole memory slams home that this strike is the family's finishing move, not some random swing. Years later, the narrator remembers that moment as incredible and unforgettable, the kind of thing you brag about forever and never quite get over. He even remembers cheering the grandfather on, which is a lot easier to do when you are not the one standing in front of the blade. The strike lands, the warrior stands there with the glowing sword, and afterward only one word sticks in memory. When the narrator asks if that word is the grandfather's name, the elder cuts in and says it is the sword's name instead. That leads straight into the next lesson, because the boy asks what a swordless mark even means, and the answer is simple enough. It is the trace and damage left behind when the sword is not even there. In other words, the technique matters so much that the air itself remembers it. The memory snaps to a completely different sort of panic when the bearded man reacts to the word bride-to-be, and suddenly everybody sounds way too invested in somebody else's love life. The elder gets jealous on sight, the young master says he has no intention of marrying, and the whole exchange turns into a mess of flirting, denial, and one very awkward question about whether he likes men. Then the story yanks back toward training, with Mujin standing in that eerie blue glow, while 4 instructors look down over the assembled trainees. One of them declares they are the 4 martial arts instructors in charge, and the warm welcome is to strap rice sacks on their backs, because apparently this lesson starts by making everyone suffer in bulk. The first instructor steps forward with that cold teal glow around him, making it clear this training starts with pain, not encouragement. He spells out the rule too. The test only counts if they can carry the sacks and still leave in one piece. Then he tells them to decide whether they are taking the test, which is a polite way of saying there is no polite way out. One look at the trainees, and you can tell the rice sacks are already winning the argument. He doubles down and threatens anyone who drops a sack or even starts whining, so the whole group grits their teeth and keeps moving. This is the clan's reset button, and it hurts on purpose. While the trainees are still suffering under the weight, a separate order cuts through the chaos to tell someone to bring young Master Hua Mujin. That's the pivot, because the training floor is no longer just about endurance, it's about who gets pointed at next. The next hit lands hard enough to send a body flying, and the attacker stands over the downed victim without hesitation. Mujin's philosophy comes out plain here. Debts and grudges do not get buried, they get settled cleanly. At the same time, Nosak and Jangtae get their orders, with the commander splitting the work between the warrior test and the next move. The clan is no longer improvising, which means Mujin's side is finally acting like a force instead of a mess. From there, the battle opens up fast, with fighters rushing in and Mujin stepping into the center of it all. He answers the chaos with a simple promise: let's go. His power surges in the middle of the clash, and the change is impossible to miss when his eye turns supernatural and his whole presence catches fire. This is the moment the room stops treating him like a bullied kid and starts treating him like a problem. Then the war overhead kicks loose, with lightning ripping down through the sky and fighters plunging through the air in coordinated attacks. Whatever target they are chasing is big enough to drag the whole battlefield with it. Someone with a weapon in hand realizes the real prey was never small, and the next exchange turns into a desperate hunt. Mujin gathers himself again, then raises his hand as the energy comes back in a red wave. He bursts forward in blue light, slams through the clash, and keeps the pressure on while the enemy tries to answer blow for blow. The fight is no longer balanced, it is Mujin forcing everyone else to react. A demon-like silhouette flares in the glare, and Mujin keeps cutting through with red and white energy until the whole exchange starts looking one-sided. He keeps accelerating through the assault, like the fight forgot to ask his permission first. The opposition finally panics and shouts for someone to block Wamujin's movements, but that only tells you how bad the situation already is. Then the blood scent hits him, and the man who came to rebuild the clan grabs his opponent with overwhelming force, ending the moment on pure domination. Mujin has already turned the fight upside down, and now the only question is how badly the other side breaks before the next phase of the war even starts. Up ahead, the clash in the air keeps widening, while somewhere nearby the forest is about to turn from tense to ugly. The aerial exchange lands its first hard answer when Mujin drives one enemy back and then stands his ground in front of the onlookers, showing off power they clearly did not budget for. He draws up even more force for the finish, and that kind of confidence usually shows up right before somebody gets embarrassed. The scene cuts to the woods, where a woman spots a fleeing figure and instantly senses something is off. That hesitation matters, because a heartbeat later, blue force comes tearing down at the masked woman and turns doubt into survival mode. Someone snaps at the group for getting too close to danger, then points at the bodies on the ground to make the lesson impossible to ignore. The warning is simple enough: keep pushing here and they can end up just as dead. Back with Mujin, he demands confirmation from his people, and they answer fast because nobody wants to be the one who hesitates in his orbit. Then he pours red gold energy through his hands and fingers, and the whole battlefield starts feeling like it picked the wrong day to stand still. Mujin lets that power erupt outward, swallowing the target area in orange-red fire. The victims are left inside a burning storm, and even their own bodies start registering the pain like it is both familiar and horrifyingly new. He pushes it over the edge with a surge of flame and lightning, so violent it looks less like a technique and more like a verdict. After that, the battlefield is no longer a contest, just damage control with bad odds. While the aftermath spreads, a commander barks for the search to hurry up, because losing track of people in this mess means letting the enemy vanish cleanly. Nearby, one captive thrashes against the bindings, which is about the most honest reaction anyone has had all day. In the forest, a man tells a child to stay close. Then another man stands guard over two children and orders an immediate scan. The quiet is only temporary, because everyone there knows a single mistake turns a hiding place into a grave. A masked woman thinks through the cost of fighting here and realizes the whole area can collapse into disaster if the wrong move lands. Then a man keeps it almost offensively casual while walking the children away, and that act alone says he is trying to control the temperature before it explodes. The tension spikes again as a face twists under strain, red energy starts swirling, and another figure floats in a tiny chibi-sized burst of panic like the situation has officially gone off the rails. Then somebody finally yells what everyone else is thinking: "Get his hand off her right now." The opponent answers with pure contempt and throws out a threat, then doubles down by mocking the young fighter's age and saying he will kill him anyway. That sets up the real point of the exchange. Nobody is getting spared just for being young, and the next strike has to prove otherwise. The larger clash closes back in as a massive attack comes down on the group, and Mujin meets it head-on instead of giving ground. He drives his own energy into the impact, and the fight hangs there in the middle of the collision, neither side willing to blink first. Mujin finally forces the clash open, and the opponent starts losing ground fast. One side hurls technique after technique, but the other keeps answering every hit instead of folding, which is how a fight turns from pressure into panic. The bearded fighter catches the orange blast on his weapon, then Mujin snaps back with a red counter so hard it turns the whole exchange into a flare of impact. And that is the danger now. The fight is no longer about surviving the first strike, it is about who can survive the answer. The red-dressed fighter swings back with orange slashes, but the cloth-faced fighter shuts that down and fires right back, forcing Jingtae to see just how ugly this has gotten. Jingtae's alarm says it all, and the opponent leans in with a flat promise to kill him anyway. The weapon collision erupts in a brutal orange blast, and the bearded fighter gets thrown clear by the force of it. For a second, the red-dressed fighter stands over the wreckage like the matter is settled, and pain starts setting in for the one who just got sent flying. Even then, the defeated fighter hauls himself up through another incoming strike, because this duel is clearly not finished until somebody stops moving. The pressure keeps climbing, and the next exchange turns into a straight-up sword test at full speed. Mujin answers with everything he has, pushing the sword forms out in a burst that leaves no room for caution. Then he lands the real reversal. He reads the opponent's pattern, says he has grasped every one of those sword strikes, and snaps back with a red counter of his own. The opponent still lands a clean hit, but it barely buys a breath before Mujin gets smashed back by a heavier blow and finally goes down hard. That is the payoff of this whole exchange. The fight swings from mutual pressure to a clear humiliation, and the victor starts taking control of the battlefield. A new figure steps in with a message about strength and moving forward, while a cyan aura flares around him like he has already decided how this ends. Nearby, another master stands with his followers behind him, and the whole field starts feeling a lot less like a duel and a lot more like a war forming around Mujin. Someone gets hit so hard it leaves blood everywhere, then ends up face down and done, which is the kind of result nobody argues with twice. A red-cloaked victor drops in over the aftermath, asks the fallen man's name, and then curses him to never find peace, even in death. The next fighter stares at his glowing weapon and wonders if the threat in front of him is really that strong. Behind him, a tall figure stands with a child nearby, and a group gathered in the background, which means this mess has already spread beyond one clean fight. The young fighter clears up who the tall man is, a peak martial master called the Crimson Moon Sword. That turns the whole standoff from random noise into a proper warning sign. Then the Crimson Moon Sword leaves the group to take his own path, and the others keep moving through the forest after him. He is not waiting around for anyone to catch up. Back on the road, an elder greets young Master Hua with clear respect, and Mujin answers by saying he has already fought through 30 assassins and beaten the Crimson Moon Sword on the way in. That is not small talk, that is a resume with blood on it. Before the dust can settle, Jingtae steps in and complains that Mujin is already annoying his big brother, so the family tension keeps spreading even after the fighting pauses. The next exchange snaps straight back into violence as a swordsman comes down hard on a younger fighter, but the target answers by pushing up with raw power instead of backing off. The attack lands, and the response says this kid is not staying pinned for long. Mujin then appears alongside wolf companions and keeps that same pressure rolling. looking more and more like the center of the entire mess. When a fighter starts drawing lightning and comes back bloodied anyway, the message is simple: force alone is no longer enough to stop him. Mujin turns the counterattack into a full-on rout, cutting down from above, descending with chain slashes, and smashing the ground with red destructive waves. By the end of it, even the shop area is wrecked, which is a costly way to learn somebody's name. That destruction exposes a bigger thread. The bearded man realizes the Hua family has Tang Clan ties, and now Tang Clan warriors step forward in formation with their leader. The fight has moved from local trouble to faction business, which is always when things get expensive. The Tang Clan leader drives the point home by ordering everyone to kneel and bow their heads. Mujin answers by showing up with a red aura and enough pressure to make the room feel smaller. Then Mujin goes masked and brutal, swinging a huge red staff and smashing enemies so hard they start begging for mercy. One of them finally cracks and offers information just to stay alive, which tells you how badly this is going for them. Mujin narrows in on the answer he wants, his single red eye burning through the mask as he demands to know where the target is right now. This stops being a brawl and becomes a hunt. The trail points to Zigong Taishan Martial Hall at sunset, and the enemy blurts out a last desperate confirmation before the shock reaches Hyunwoo. Now the Shaolin Grandmaster knows the Flamehua clan's Mujin is involved, and that changes the scale of the fight again. Hyunwoo reels at the news that Mujin has blood relatives, and that little discovery immediately widens the whole mess from a clan crisis into a family one. While that lands, the story shifts over to Imei, where an elder stops by for one last look before leaving, and the abbess Jinhua is introduced as the calm face at the center of that sect. From there, the focus swings into the Tang clan, one of the 5 great clans, where Poison Emperor Tang Sumun sits at the heart of the family drama. The problem is simple and ugly. Tang Hojung is only 18, so one side wants her sent away, while Tang Jungchun argues that losing her out in the world would be worse than keeping her close. Then the Tang family branches widen even more, with Tang Sohei from the collateral line stepping in, and Tang Ho-chung being formally introduced as Jungchun's daughter. It is the kind of clan business that sounds polite right up until you realize everyone in the room is measuring leverage. The tone changes again as a woman asks to be held and the man freezes for a beat before giving in, which tells you this reunion hits harder than either of them expected. In that strange blue-lit moment, they cling together, and the woman finally admits she missed him so much that the whole scene turns personal in a hurry. That tenderness does not last long. A demonic force erupts in red energy, and the blast rips through the people caught near it, turning the reunion into a disaster in one ugly swing. Somewhere else in the chaos, a bald man snaps at a hooded figure for not warning him sooner, and the answer makes the whole setup look even sketchier. The place was full of hallucinogenic smoke. A woman then vows to burn everything down, which is a pretty direct way of saying the situation has gone completely off the rails. Mujin then steps into a hidden room already boiling with power, and the guy inside realizes too late that this little hideout has been found. Mujin calls him a lowlife, forces him to wake up, and makes it clear he is not here to chat. Now Mujin draws the line in the sand and gives the Sangru side 10 days to back off, which means this is no longer a warning but a deadline. The next beat answers with fire, as the Sangru compound goes up and the conflict starts eating the ground under everyone's feet. That fire carries straight into the Flamehua clan estate, where people start arguing about who should even handle the crisis first. Then the bearded man spots an unexpected crowd, and the surprise gets bigger fast when Poison Emperor Tang Sumun shows up there in person. Poison Emperor shuts down the neat little order of arrival rule and reminds everyone who he is, which is a very fast way to win an argument. Right beside that clash of egos, Mujin appears in full force with mythical beasts at his side, and the scene ends with the kind of gathering that tells every faction the balance has changed. The debt talk turns blunt fast. The bearded man asks how anyone plans to repay a burden this huge, and the answer starts pointing straight at the clan's survival. In a place with no real authority, that kind of debt is not bookkeeping, it is a leash. Then the old legal shield comes out, with one man calmly invoking the law of the Central Plains, and another insisting there is no rule, forcing a disciple into temple ranks. It is a polite argument, which is usually how people in Murim start measuring where the knives will go. The tension shifts location when Zhengte is named in the mountains, and the next heartbeat brings 2 figures out of crystalline light like trouble had to arrive with special effects. One urgent plea follows right behind, because the faction wants a decision before hesitation costs them the field. A sect member pushes back, warning they have no right to draw swords without justification, but the meeting is already sliding out of the safe zone. When former acquaintances finally reunite, the first thing said is simple and nasty. Mujin did not come here to be the sword of the Changhua merchant group. That declaration lands, and then the Pengyang merchant group gets dragged into the mess as fighting breaks out between the sides. Energy flies, one warrior gets blasted backward, and the whole argument turns into a power test the second somebody thinks words are enough. The pressure keeps climbing as representatives of the Changhua merchant group and Kongdong sect finally arrive and announce themselves in the loudest way possible. Now the dispute stops being local gossip and becomes a public showdown with major backing on both sides. Mujin answers that pressure by naming himself as Hua Mujin of the Flamehua clan, then launches upward with enough force to make the room understand he is not here to play support role. The elder's remark about Kongdong sect chasing him so eagerly makes the real issue clear. Everyone has decided Mujin is worth chasing. When the challenge comes back at him, Mujin refuses to bow just because elders from Kongdong sect stand nearby, and the response is pure intimidation wrapped in purple power. The message is simple enough for anyone listening. If someone still thinks the Korean peninsula is an easy prize, they should come see him here. The bearded man keeps pressing the younger one, asking what he actually wants and whether compensation for Pyongyang Merchant Group is the point. Then the dark-robed figure cuts him off with a flat insult and a harder demand. Changhwa Merchant Group must withdraw completely. That demand draws disbelief because now the exchange is no longer about manners, it is about control of the whole merchant conflict. Someone asks if the other side really thinks it can say anything it wants, then holds up an object like proof that the conversation has already gone too far. The atmosphere snaps when Mujin reveals his demonic, near-divine presence and tells them to give him one reason he should spare their lives. That is the point where the negotiation dies for good, because nobody in the room can mistake who holds the upper hand anymore. Mujin finishes by standing with his sword ready, wrapped in blue aura, and he raises a hand to start the battle on his own terms. After all the debt talk and faction posturing, this is where the real answer finally begins. Mujin cuts the argument short with a blue-tinged slash, and the guy on the receiving end folds under the shock. One instant later, he is staring in disbelief because he just got beaten before he could even process the opening move. That instant loss rattles the whole room, and the panic spreads fast enough to kill any last scraps of confidence. Mujin does not let it breathe either, because once the fear sets in, the fight is already halfway over. He pushes the threat harder, laying out a brutal choice and making it clear the Changhwa Merchant Group is on the chopping block. If they keep resisting, then he stands there with two beast spirits behind him and those red eyes doing the talking for him. The pressure on the room makes his identity click into place. This is the Flame Hua clan's Hua Mujin, and the reason he is still talking instead of just swinging is simple enough. He cannot afford to gamble the merchant group away on a messy finish. That forceful stance echoes outward into bigger conflicts, slashing through other clashes and then jumping ahead in time. A few days later, the heat has cooled just enough for the next gathering to form, which means the wider plan is still alive. People start talking about how strong the Flame Hua clan and Mujin have become, and the respect is loud enough to sound inconvenient. Mujin keeps his distance and says he has been away from the clan too long, so he will look forward to the next meeting instead of forcing one now. The situation twists again when someone starts moving too fast and another voice snaps for them to wait. That pause matters because the chase is about to drag more people into the same mess, and nobody wants the whole thing collapsing into chaos. Meanwhile, another fight is already exhausting people who have been handling it alone, and the warning is clear: letting your guard down now could cost both siblings. Hyunwoo steps in from Shaolin, one of the elder martial names in the room, and the masked fighter beside him answers by saying she will swallow both serpents herself. The exchange ends on a sharp correction, because the bond between the siblings matters more than any show of force. He apologizes, but he makes it plain that Soyeon is his one and only younger sister, and that is the line nobody gets to blur. Mujin warns that once a master-disciple bond forms, it is not something you shake off just because the mood changes. The warning lands hard, and Soyeon snaps back at him with real force, so this whole conversation stops being casual right away. Soyeon answers the challenge by stepping into the fight and driving straight at the weapon in front of her. Then she unleashes snow-drifting cloud-piercing palm strike, and the strike keeps pushing downward until the pressure feels less like martial arts and more like a wall coming off its hinges. That display seals the point instantly. This is not just training, it is proof that the alliance has real teeth. Soyeon blesses the connection between Aimee sect and her side of the Flamehua clan, and the praise follows right after, because both clans just got publicly tied together. What hits hardest is not the technique itself, but the kind of person standing behind it. The speaker admits that what captured his heart most was the foundation of her character, which is a fancy way of saying the girl's stubbornness made the whole room behave. Then Hyunwoo steps in and makes the offer plain. He wants Soyeon as his disciple. Mujin has already opened the door to a bigger shift in training, and now that shift becomes official, with an elder master claiming a new student in front of everyone. Hyunwoo backs that up with a crushing demonstration of force, and the reaction makes it clear the move is no joke. He says he wants Soyeon under him without breaking the clan's tree, which means he is trying to take her talent without snapping the branch she comes from. The same trust then reaches Mujin, because the next request is for Hyunwoo to teach him well too. Hyunwoo grumbles about losing talent from Sichuan to Mount Hong, but he still admits the boy is worth the trouble, which is basically a monk's version of a grudging compliment. And that is the real shift here. The clan's promising young people are no longer just surviving. They are being pulled into formal inheritance and training. Hyunwoo says he does not want to let the recruit slip away, and then he admits the age gap somehow stops mattering because the kid reminds him of an old friend. That memory runs deeper than nostalgia though, because it points to someone who once walked away from martial life and even disobeyed a master's final wish. She is described like a lotus flower, and as someone who never accepted help from strangers, which is a very graceful way of saying she was stubborn enough to make everyone else suffer for it. Then the old power starts showing through again. The figure transforms, tears through all 9 sects, and manifests divine force, so this scene stops being about introductions and turns into a reminder that one awakened master can still wreck the whole board. The offer that follows comes with a warning, because whatever item is being handed over is not simple and definitely not harmless. Mujin cuts in like he has heard enough weird talk for one day, asks if the guy is drunk, and then the real reason for after the tension starts surfacing. A name lands in the middle of the conversation, and suddenly the room is not talking in riddles anymore. Namgung Chaenyong is recognized. Mujin says the enemy's name has never left his mind for even a single moment, and then he folds 15 years of pursuit into one brutal confession. Mujin then admits he started by killing every Namgung he could find, which tells you exactly how personal this grudge has become. He finally calls himself the Divine Demon, and the pressure of that identity snaps the scene into the old legend coming back to life. Now the memory sharpens into a specific moment in Guizhou, where Mujin first spots the enemy sitting with 4 clan heads. He attacks, and the confrontation resolves into a direct meeting with clan head Hwa in the hall, which is the kind of reunion nobody in that room was hoping for. Mujin has already dragged one buried secret into the open, and now the real fight is whether the old legends still count for anything in this new era. Clan head Hwa realizes this young man knows a shame he tried to bury for 60 years, and Mujin presses the point by asking the one question that splits the martial world in half: orthodox or demonic? He answers by standing over the wreckage and making the argument impossible to dodge, because the 9 sects have blood on their hands too. In other words, Mujin is not asking for permission, he is asking who gets to pretend they are righteous. When clan head Hwa half laughs at the logic, Mujin keeps going and explains that his master handed down the art so it would survive, then passed it on to him. That leaves the other man with the ugly math of it all, and Mujin says outright that if they clash, he would have almost no chance whatsoever. The revelation hits hard, because the thing under the surface is no cheap parlor trick at all. Someone finally hears that such a realm exists, and that shock is enough to drag the truth into daylight. The hidden identity finally lands. Hidden Dragon Hua Mujin is Chung Chun, the Divine Demon, and that name carries enough weight to freeze the room. Even the dragon imagery is just decoration next to the actual problem, which is that the old monster is back, and everyone now has to deal with him. From there, the story widens, because the next generation starts learning secret arts at a ridiculous pace, while the adults are still trying to recover from the name Chung Chun. That kind of talent means the martial balance is already shifting again, whether anyone likes it or not. Then the clan politics kick back in, and the room pivots from lore to succession. The Flamehua clan is about to hold its 3rd clan head ceremony, which means power is no longer a private argument. Clan head Hua moves through the gathered crowd under far more eyes than he probably wants, and the sheer number of invited clansmen makes the whole thing feel like a public test. Even the old guard can tell this is not a quiet handoff. It is a statement. Outside the ceremony, allied clans and strange visitors start clustering around the Flamehua clan, and the social web gets even tighter. The congratulations come fast, but so do the reminders that Tang clan, Eimei, and Shaolin all have skin in this game. The real prize is money, and everyone in the room knows it. Changhua Merchant Group profits are being shared around, monthly gains are absurd, and that kind of wealth turns a clan ceremony into a power summit. So clan head Hua finally calls it. From this moment on, the 3rd succession ceremony of the Flamehua clan begins. He closes his eyes, makes his vow, and says he will only borrow it until then, which sounds calm right up until you remember how much blood has already been spilled to get here. And just like that, the board resets again, with the new phase of the struggle opening over the clan, the city, and the martial world waiting beyond it. Mujin holds his sword across his body and fixes the room with that cold, murderous stare that means somebody is already losing and just does not know it yet. Then he brings the blade down and declares the count out loud, like this whole ceremony has turned into an accounting problem with blood on the floor. The strike lands so hard it throws up an explosion, and clan head Hua watches from above as Mujin's pressure starts ripping the compound open. Somewhere in the chaos, a victor throws a fist up over the compound, and the palanquin, acting like the fight is already over. That matters, because the ceremony has stopped being ceremonial and turned into a public warning. Mujin stands at the ornate gate, bathed in red light, and makes the killing promise plain. This time, he ends it for sure. He charges straight in and shouts his target's name, because when Mujin commits, he does it with a full announcement and zero interest in politeness. Inside the next exchange, the talk gets weirdly academic, as one man presses a woman about why she stayed silent, then another asks his master about the 100-step divine strike and the orthodox Miram tournament. The topic sounds like theory, but it is really about who gets to stand at the top when the fighting starts. Mujin reaches the entrance with his eyes lit up and his intent set, then walks in saying he can feel the murderous spirit ahead of him. He is not here to negotiate, and everybody in range immediately gets that message. He explodes into motion with blue-tinged force, kicking through the opening and driving the pace so hard the battlefield can barely keep up. One clean rush from Mujin is already enough to make the first wave look flimsy. After that burst, he sizes up the odds and realizes he is still staring down 30 elites plus 2 more problems on top of them. That is the moment the scene shifts from a simple clash to a full-on war inside the ceremony. Then the ground blows apart again, and the Fire Shadow twin elders step out of the smoke with their own answer to Mujin's aggression. They ask why he is doing this, and he gets the honor of being the one thing they came to kill. The elders settle into attack, and one of them promises a painless send-off, which is a very generous thing to say right before trying to kill someone. Mujin answers by waking up the power in his own eyes and meeting fire with force. The clash goes past normal combat and starts tearing both sides apart, with the terrain itself coming apart under the pressure. That is the practical lesson here. Once Mujin starts releasing real power, the battlefield stops belonging to anyone else. Nearby, another figure with a strange golden serpent-like structure in his head watches and gives the kind of approval that means this level of power is exactly what he wanted to see. Out on a different stretch of the fight, an armored warrior surges up, a white-haired soldier closes his eyes, and the whole conflict keeps widening instead of cooling down. The aftermath spills into a forest clearing, where the explosion and fire still hang in the air like proof that nobody is in control anymore. Only then do the Fire Shadow Twin Elders get named outright, and the room finally has to admit who Mujin is fighting. The Elders catch the scent of blood and tense up, while Clan Head Hoa warns that the smell is thick enough to matter. That warning lands hard, because it means the battle has already spread far enough that even the veterans can feel it coming. Finally, someone steps in and asks the bleeding figure if he is the Sichuan hidden dragon, then wonders if he was sent by the Crescent Moon Sword. In other words, the whole scene has already escalated into the kind of mess where everybody starts guessing wrong about who brought the knife. A monk finally reads the situation out loud. Demons from Guizhou have marched all the way into Sichuan. That is bad news with a passport, and everyone in the room feels it. One of the demons practically lights up with excitement at the thought of meeting Mujin, then makes his real intentions clear by talking about slitting throats. So this is not a negotiation, it is a warm welcome from Hell's worst customer service desk. The tension spikes as the fighters square off inside the hall, and Mujin moves first with a cyan slash that tears into the armored line. The fight stops being theory the second he cuts in. Someone blinks at the sudden mess and asks when the enemies even got here, which is fair because the room has gone from tense to ruined in a heartbeat. Mujin does not waste time answering, and that silence says enough. Clan Head Hua refuses to get pinned down and orders the group to force a path through while he handles the warriors chasing them from behind. He is buying time with his own body, which is the kind of plan that usually comes with bruises. A powerful fighter takes his stance, gets dismissed as useless, and answers by flooding the air with cyan power anyway. Then he swears he will take the brat's head because subtlety clearly missed the meeting. From a distance, an observer sizes Mujin up and admits the kid's bloodlust is terrifyingly close to a great one. That is the point where the battle stops feeling like a skirmish and starts feeling like a real disaster. Mujin answers that pressure with one clean opening, charges in, and fires off the 100 steps Divine Fist strike. The impact lands so hard that his opponent reels, and the whole exchange turns into a straight-up power test. His opponent refuses to fold and answers with the same 100 steps Divine Fist strike, then threatens to snap Mujin's head off. Now both sides are throwing the same family of technique at each other, which is never a sign of a healthy afternoon. The chase keeps rolling as the enemy drives after Mujin and demands he come back, only to hit a wall of force he did not expect. Even the watcher can only laugh and call it a soulmate, which is a ridiculous way to describe a deathmatch, but somehow fits. Then the battlefield widens again as a demon surges up in red fire, and another fighter gathers blue power to meet him. Their energies smash together, and the whole clash becomes a red versus cyan collision that nobody can ignore. The exchange tightens into raw technique, with fists ringed in red and cyan as both sides commit to the hit. A red-cloaked warrior then drives down on his opponent, and the defense has to hold or everything breaks right there. The pressure keeps climbing until another fighter stands ready with a large blade wrapped in cyan aura, while a separate figure is swallowed by a green vortex. Mujin is in the middle of a battlefield where every side is escalating at once, and he is still the one forcing the pace. At the end of it all, Mujin's masked face comes into view with purple magenta energy running through it, and that is the clearest answer in the room. He is not just surviving this wave of demons, he is meeting them head on and cutting off their advance before they can decide the war for him. The skeleton fighter digs in under a red aura, but the pressure breaks him fast and his face twists with panic. Mujin keeps the assault rolling, and the battlefield starts feeling less like a brawl and more like a collapse. Then the attacks switch color and shape as cyan and gold energy slam down together, each hit trying to end the other side's momentum. It is the kind of exchange where one clean mistake gets you buried, so everyone keeps swinging like their lives are already late. Mujin cuts through the chaos by parrying multiple attacks at once, then squeezing the fight back into his own rhythm. While he does that, the enemy commander screams for the formation to hold and sends the third squad at the carriage to butcher the brats, because subtlety clearly missed the briefing. A warrior at the center of it all snarls under the pressure and starts talking like someone with a reputation to protect, not a plan to explain. He gets named as one of the 4 pillars of Zhongshan, the sort of fighter who never backs down from injustice, which is exactly the kind of introduction that invites trouble. He answers by bringing his weapon down in a cyan-powered strike, and that resets the whole clash around him. The enemy gets one look at that and has to keep scrambling, because now the fight is happening on Mujin's terms again. The next exchange turns into a ninja ambush, with the attackers crossing overhead and then diving in too wide. They even admit the miss and start yelling to aim for the head, which is a bold instruction to give after you already whiffed the first try. Mujin answers in the air, deflecting the strike and chaining it straight into blue slashes that tear downward through the line. By the time the combo finishes, the attackers are getting carved up before they can recover their footing. One fighter freezes in confusion as another appears out of the smoke, and the new arrival immediately starts drawing steel with red and blue energy crackling around it. That sudden entrance shifts the whole duel, because now Mujin has to read a fresh threat before the first one can regroup. The two combatants crash head on, and the blue fighter answers with the snow-drifting cloud-piercing palm strike. The red fighter gets shoved back hard, then eats another heavy hit from above, while the blue fighter stays close enough to keep the pressure brutal. The gray-haired fighter barely blocks the next attack and snaps that he will not get hit again, so this side clearly knows it is running out of room. Muujin's opponent fires back with a finishing move meant to punch a massive hole through him, and the blue technique blows straight through the defense anyway. Muujin sees the next Cyan attack coming and braces instead of pretending he can tank it head on, which is the smart choice for exactly one heartbeat. He still collides with the attack in a violent burst, and the explosion leaves the melee hanging on the edge of a bigger break. Muujin drives straight through the blue and Cyan exchange and clamps both hands onto his opponent, turning the fight from trading blows into a full-on grapple. The other man answers by dumping energy downward and basically tells him he is going to the underworld too, which is a rude way to frame a final move. The blast sends Muujin dropping hard while his opponent follows, and for a second the whole duel hangs on who can survive the fall. Muujin catches the impact badly, then the two of them slam back together in mid-air as blue energy erupts between them. His red-haired opponent fires another red beam to finish the job, and Muujin goes crashing into the ground below instead of pretending he can keep floating through it. That hit forces the whole clash to spill into a new phase, because now everyone has to deal with the damage, not just the duel. On the ground, Clan Head Hwa is left injured and someone is urgently telling him to get up, which makes the cost of that exchange impossible to ignore. Muujin then snaps right back into his usual menace, promising he will clean up his technique next time and landing the line about those hideous heads of theirs like he is already planning the rematch. He follows that with a manic grin and calls it fun, because apparently getting flattened is just another warm-up for this guy. Then the fight widens again as the next threat shows up with a glowing purple blade and a surge of red-orange power, which means the real problem was never just the duel in front of them. Both sides square off across the misty ground, and the pause makes one thing clear. This battlefield is already getting torn apart. Bodies are strewn everywhere, one fighter is barely holding on, and the survivors are forced to look at each other and admit they need a temporary alliance, or they are both finished. The alliance lasts exactly as long as the next explosion, because a massive fire blast tears through the field and launches the whole conflict into open war. Muujin answers with a sweeping slash, and then the red fire palm strike, putting his own name on the attack instead of letting the enemy control the tempo. Clan Head Hwa finally recognizes what he is really facing, and admits the Fire Shadow Twin Elders are no empty title, which says plenty about how nasty this situation has gotten. After that, the flaming sword strike and the shock running through it show just how brutal the power gap is, and the two combatants smash together in mid-air as the collision finally reaches its peak. The Fire Shadow Twin Elders press first, and the opening strike hits Muujin before he can reset. The red force drives him across the ground, then keeps bearing down, so dodging is no longer the plan. Muujin meets the next clash head-on, but the exchange turns ugly fast. The follow-up attack crashes into him, and even his borrowed experience has to respect a hit that rude. The Elders multiply the pressure with a wider technique, filling the fight with more attacks than one body should have to answer. When the dust breaks, two fighters are down, and the field finally looks like the cost is catching up. Then the killing move comes out, Fire Dragon Destructive Palm Strike. It is not just a bigger flame, it is the Elders trying to end the fight before Muujin can turn their own fire against them. Muujin feels the strike land and refuses to fold. His body flares into a full fire form, and the blast around him turns from punishment into fuel. The flames wrap him from every side, but he holds his stance instead of breaking. The explosion keeps climbing overhead, and the Elders stare like the floor just argued back. This is the turn. Muujin realizes the fire energy is spreading through his whole body through vibration, so the attack meant to crush him starts teaching him how to absorb it. His eyes ignite, and now the recovery is happening inside the damage. One Elder snarls for him to taste hell, then slams the Fire Dragon Destructive Palm Strike forward again. Muujin answers directly, and the collision becomes a test of control, not raw heat. The two forces merge and grind against each other until a blue presence rises over Muujin. That support gives him room to stabilize the fire instead of getting buried under it, which is exactly the opening he needs. Muujin drives the mixed power back through the battlefield, forcing blue and red energy into one controlled counter. He channels it through his hand, neat enough to be terrifying, which is not a sentence his enemies wanted in their day. A red demonic form manifests in the flames and rushes into the clash. Muujin meets it with a blue force still active, turning the Elder's pressure into a contest he can finally shape. The fight breaks into its harshest exchange yet, a weapon falls through the rain, fire swallows the target, and the raging form burns brighter under the impact. Then a cyan strike tears in, and someone screams as the punishment finally lands clean. The blast launches the fighter upward through debris, and the battlefield goes quiet enough for watchers to matter again. Two elderly figures observe from the forest while a man on a rooftop watches a white explosion erupt nearby, meaning Muujin's breakthrough has become everyone's problem. Muujin takes the full fire backlash and spits blood as the flames roar around him, but he stays upright long enough for everyone else to live. Clan Head Hwa, the Flame Hwa clan leader, already fighting through wounds, collapses onto the burning ground while his people shout for him. The fight is no longer just about winning. If the elders push through now, the children and the clan head are finished. Muujin throws himself between the children and the danger, raising a barrier and ordering them not to come closer. He sounds less like a wounded kid and more like a wall that learned to yell. Clan Head Hwa forces out orders through the pain, telling Nosak, the martial arts instructor, to find a lesser purifying pill in his bundle. Muujin keeps guarding the children, so the recovery plan has one fragile chance to work. The clan head fades with his eyes closed while fire eats at the battlefield, and every second without that pill gets uglier. Muujin turns back toward the enemy with a calm face, which is rude behavior from someone standing inside a furnace. That forces the adults to change roles. Soldiers are ordered to surround the area and guard every direction, but they are warned not to get close. close. Mujin is now the center of the battlefield, and everyone else becomes the perimeter. The soldiers scatter into position while Mujin pulls the fire into himself, his aura widening instead of breaking. The same power that was crushing them starts becoming fuel. Mujin steadies his breathing and lets the fire flow through his body with terrifying control. Panic leaves his face, which is usually a bad sign for the person who caused the panic. He decides to drive all that fire energy into his middle energy core, turning raw danger into a controlled power state. This is the pivot. Mujin stops surviving the flame and starts owning it. The transformation erupts around him, and the pressure pouring off Mujin drowns out the battlefield. Then he releases a fire-based technique with the force he just gathers, striking back before the enemy can recover. The flames spread wider, and the attack grows into something too large to brush aside. At this point, blocking it with confidence would need a signed apology from both arms. The technique slams into the opponents cleanly, and the momentum finally flips in Mujin's favor. A heavy impact drives the exchange into the ground, ending the rush with brute confirmation. Mujin has protected the children, bought time for clan head Hua, and turned a losing fight into recovery. An elder can barely process what just happened. A young man barely past adulthood has defeated the Crimson Moonsword, a peak martial master, and the Fire Shadow Twin Elders, the fire-wielding pair who pushed this battle to the edge. The judgment lands on clan head Hua next. After witnessing this, they say he can no longer stay tucked behind the old label of Hidden Dragon. The aftermath shifts to raw power, as a swordsman stands with a huge blade while energy gathers in his hand. The veins and marks in that hand flare with force, showing how close the technique came to devouring him too. He admits he almost lost his life because he underestimated it. That is a very formal way to say the fire nearly collected rent. Elsewhere, a man sits alone behind sealed doors marked with crossed planks and denies the whole thing ever happened. The denial matters because Mujin's rise is already becoming too big for powerful people to ignore. An authority figure accepts that the situation may escalate and orders Hong Ho to be brought in. The fight has stopped being local damage control and started becoming faction business. Another warrior declares he will wash away the disgrace from Sangwon here, then gathers his energy to make that vow more than noise. A red-haired figure links with a dark demonic form, and the result explodes into massive flame energy. Someone clearly looked at the last disaster and requested the deluxe version. The hidden dragon name returns again, now attached to a reputation nobody can treat lightly. Mujin's power has moved from rumor to problem. Someone recalls a lifetime spent restoring the 100 Steps Divine Fist Strike, weighing old martial obsession against the new chaos spreading around Mujin. Haiyan Gak, the Shaolin Temple abbot, is remembered in the same breath as a madman tied to the Flamehua clan. That memory keeps the older generation uneasy, because today's fire is waking up old names. Then word comes that someone was encountered on the way here, adding one more moving piece to a situation already crowded with sharp objects. The observer admits Mujin's reputation is deserved after seeing the power display firsthand. With that confirmed, the decision hardens. It is time to settle matters with the unorthodox factions. Mujin's victory does not end the conflict, it gives everyone a reason to move faster. Mujin stands silently on a rooftop and looks over the landscape. No speech needed. He has crossed into a higher power state, and now the wider martial world has to answer him. Mujin has already clawed his way up from dead and buried, and now the real problem is simpler. He's strong enough to matter, but not yet free enough to swing without restraint. In a place this crowded with rival claws, that's the difference between control and a disaster with a pulse. Someone around him starts pushing a child prodigy toward humiliation, like kneeling and begging is just part of the daily schedule. Mujin calls the guy a nutcase and steps in, because he is not in the mood to watch stupidity turn into a murder report. Then the kid's power wakes up in a hurry, and the whole exchange stops being about arrogance and turns into a real martial threat. The title 7 Wounds hangs over him as he drives blue force down into the attack, which means Mujin is now looking at a fighter with hidden teeth. That clash spills outward into a bigger mess of fighters, and the talk shifts to a brother who already got broken by the same kind of hit. Somebody regrets not sending the other person along too, which is a very polite way of saying this family argument has gone fully feral. The dark-robed attacker barrels through the opposition, blasting bodies back and cursing everyone in reach. He keeps pressing a young opponent, and even throws out the taunt about death while claiming the kid's own young master already gave permission to kill, because apparently consent is now being weaponized. The fight tightens into a direct power struggle, and the younger fighter gets driven back again and again until he's barely standing. The attacker lands the final shove of force and leaves him stunned, which is the kind of moment where the battle stops being fair and starts being a warning. Mujin answers the chaos with his own burst of blue and red force, punching through pressure instead of giving it room. He tells the unseen opponent that everything from here on is their own doing, then snaps back when someone insults their brother, because this whole clash just got personal in the worst possible way. The fight escalates into a full spectacle of dual power, fire, and transformation, the kind that tells everyone nearby they're dealing with more than ordinary sect muscle. Mujin's side is no longer just surviving the clash. It's dragging hidden strength into the open whether the other factions like it or not. Before anyone can recover, a warrior stands ready with 2 beasts at his side, and the whole formation screams that this is now a kill zone, not a conversation. One man slams another's head down, then follows with blue lightning and a staff threat so vicious that the target is told to stay down or lose his skull. Someone rushes in begging them to stop, but the warning that follows makes it clear the older fighter is done playing patient. He tells the younger pair to watch their mouths or face worse consequences, and the scene ends with a lone figure crackling in red power, already looking like the next problem nobody can ignore. Mujin sizes up the fighter in front of him and decides straight up that this one needs the full demonic arts to be beaten cleanly. That's not bravado anymore. That's a man realizing the room just got expensive. The accuser snaps back at the abuse, calling out the victim's condition and laying the blame on the 2-on-1 beating. Then he raises the stakes the only way a clan dispute really matters. Bring the clan head, because this mess is going upstairs. Before anyone can posture any further, clan head Mujin arrives, and the whole argument turns into a formal judgment call instead of a street brawl. One look from Hyunwoo is enough to tell everyone the rules have changed. Hyunwoo's power surges hard enough to turn the air into a disaster zone, and he acts like this is exactly the outcome he wanted. He steps forward with that glowing eye, and the defeated side folds immediately, because nobody in their right mind tests a man who can make submission look painless. Sheung-woong steps in and formally greets Hyunwoo, which makes it clear this is not a random scuffle anymore, but a meeting of serious players. The old master just smiles, and now the whole situation starts looking coordinated instead of chaotic. That's when Ime sect abbess Jinhua arrives with her attendant, and the bearded master immediately presses her about whether she attacked his disciple from behind. The answer comes the hard way, with the two sides colliding on the ground before the conversation can grow any more polite. News spreads fast that Shaolin Temple and Ime sect are aligned with Flame Hua clan, and that changes the whole tone of the room. Jinhua greets the pavilion master under grim circumstances, while he answers with pity and reminds her she still hasn't come to her senses after the Sangru incident. The duel finally kicks off in earnest, and the swordsman eats a heavy hit right out of the gate. He survives it though, and immediately shrugs it off like the first exchange barely counted, which is a bold thing to say after getting folded once. Blood on the sword says this fight is already getting ugly, and the warning attached to it makes the real target obvious. Whoever stands here is not facing the same Mujin they underestimated before. That's the problem with rumors, they keep showing up later with better timing. Jang Sue of Ame sect appears just as the tension spikes, and an elder immediately chews out a young disciple for losing focus during the preparations. Something important is being arranged here, and one distracted moment is enough to get somebody yelled at in front of everybody. Blue energy erupts from below, then a red seal locks into place around a staff-wielding warrior, and the mood turns from tense to catastrophic. Someone spots what's inside and panics, because the thing being revealed is tied to the divine demon from 30 years ago. Mujin stands before the restored presence of the divine demon's sword, and that sight makes the whole room understand why this fight matters. The master's complaint about a ruined sacred treasure lands like a verdict, and then Shaolin Abbot Hyungak declares himself at the tournament grounds, which means the big names are now done waiting in the wings. The tournament finally gets its opening call, and the crowd snaps back to the main event after all that chaos. Mujin is already in the arena, because when the fighting starts, he does not show up late like a hobbyist. The first bout explodes immediately, with one fighter driving an iron fist straight into the other's face and setting the tone the hard way. Both sides answer with raw energy and heavy strikes, so the match turns into a full power test instead of a polite warm-up. While the arena is busy trying to smash itself apart, a separate conversation turns to the demonic spirit sword spotted yesterday. One side wants it retrieved, but the warning comes fast. Monks are lying in ambush, so grabbing that sword is not a casual errand. The thief's plan becomes clear, because the sealed sword is the prize, and the whole job is to sneak it out before anyone reacts. That matters, since once the sword is named, the people guarding it already know somebody is making a move. Then the seal breaks, and the monks instantly switch from watching to hunting the thief. Mujin appears at the center of that mess, now tied to the sword's reawakening and to the panic it causes. Mujin stands with two huge supernatural beasts at his side, which is a very loud way to say he is not sneaking anywhere anymore. The whole situation has escalated from theft into a public manhunt, and everybody on the mountain knows it. He looks down and commits to the escape anyway, but the defenses around Mount Hong make that plan ugly. The pursuit goes airborne, with sword energy dragging through the sky while the search closes in behind him. Jang Soe shows up in the middle of the chase, and the exchange jumps straight back into combat. Mujin answers with a red-powered sword strike, then drives harder as the next clash lands, and his opponent has to strain just to keep up. Somewhere in the middle of all that pressure, someone realizes they have been searching for this person for a long time. Then the question lands cleanly. Is this really Clan Hedawa Mujin? Mujin answers with force instead of a speech, stomping down hard as if to pin the whole moment in place. That's when Chun Mujin appears, the Wudong Sword Dragon and a sect master, which means the chase just picked up another heavyweight. The spectators catch on that a grandfather is watching the fight, and that little family detail turns the whole clash into a public scorecard. Someone asks if the fighter is his grandson, and the answer lands with a yes before the sentence even finishes. Then the duel blows open in a rush of blue force, and both sides slam into each other hard enough to make the whole exchange feel like a verdict. This is no longer a warm-up, because one clean hit here decides who walks away standing. Chun Mujin keeps pushing through the pressure until the impact finally bites back, and he actually flinches from it. Even a swordmaster has to pay for overreaching, and that is the exact moment the crowd starts leaning in. Chun Mujin takes the duel, and the call of victory goes up right after the last clash. The fight is over, the tension breaks, and the loser is left standing in the ugly silence that follows a public beating. Then the scene shifts to someone else entirely, and this new figure comes in wrapped in a blinding aura like he just dragged power back from the grave. The point is obvious, whatever comes next is not a cleanup, it is a fresh threat waking up. He stands there with electricity cracking over his body, looking like raw force finally found a human shape. Then the book comes into play, and with blood on his face and pages open in his hands, the hook is clear. This guy has awakened, and now he is ready to make it everyone else